This is the UFC Freedom 250 Roundtable. So I got this idea a while ago based off of what they used to do on the old Sherdog radio network with Jack Encarnacio, where they would do a roundtable. So I have rounded up 4 of my smartest friends to go through the picks on this very interesting UFC White House card. So we will go through the card starting from Diego Lopes versus Steve Garcia. Each of us will give our thoughts on it, and we will make it all the way up to Ilia Topuria versus Justin Gaethje in the main event. But first, I should introduce the panel here to you, starting first with Dan Tom, who you guys probably all know pretty well if you follow any of us. We all post each other's stuff all the time, but Dan is one of the real OGs, writer for MMA Junkie, USA Today, host of the Protect Your Neck podcast, which, yeah, I think all of us have been a guest on at some point. And he's the person here that also has the misfortune of having to interact with the MMA betting community the most. How are you doing, Dan?
I'm surviving, man. Unfortunately, a lot of those episodes haven't survived. I just realized on my WordPress. So if you want any of like top 5 body shots and stoppages and fun stuff like I've done with Miguel and others on this podcast, you can check out my YouTube. But I'm just happy to be here and talk some fights with some really cool fellas.
Awesome. Thanks for coming. And next we have the other Dan Albert, also a Substack writer. And I think, Dan, you can surely lay claim to being the most obsessively meticulous in your process for deconstructing the ins and outs of fights, even the most obtuse and strange fighters. So I would encourage everybody, don't be afraid to ask Dan Albert what he thinks like the 42nd best boxing fight of all time is or something like that. How are you doing, Dan Albert?
I have learned that through this event, freedom is actually for the dogmatic individuals. So I, for one thing, approve of any and all terrible things that will happen today.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. We should probably say a few comments at some point, if you feel like it, about just the funny state of this UFC White House event. We're going to be focusing mostly on trying to break down the fights, but it is not lost to us that this is a kind of hilarious event of sports washing mixed with AI promos and the president making an investment in the parent company, all the fun stuff that you expect from a combat sport. But we should continue introducing the panel. Next up is Ryan Wagner, and he's probably the only guy in the world who follows both Stadium Muay Thai and freestyle wrestling, which I guess I'm just realizing that probably explains your interest in Sanda, right, Ryan?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're also a phenomenal writer on Substack and Cyril Monday morning clip poster on Twitter. Your favorite analyst, I think I like to call you all the time. So how are you doing, Ryan?
I'm great. Really happy to be here. Gonna be a lot of fun dipping back into MMA because I've been doing a lot of Sanda stuff lately. Been writing about the recent Sanda World Cup, Chinese kickboxing plus wrestling. It'll be interesting to take a look at some MMA fighters. I haven't done that in a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sure you will like what you find. Anyway, so the last person on the panel that I've had joining me is Fenyo, who runs the fight site. And of course, you've probably seen him produce a bunch of videos and podcasts, live fight companion streams. And I guess what I can say about Fenyo is miraculously, despite having watched the sport for as long as probably any of us, that he still watches every fight. And I think you probably are the least jaded analyst that I know. You're also a serial clip poster. And so then you have to deal with probably the worst of the reply guys on Twitter. How are you doing, Fenyo?
I'm doing pretty good right now. Yeah, I mean, I gotta be honest, like, I'm the guy that watches everything like with joy most of the time, or try. But this year is like testing my patience.
Yeah.
But it has been rough. But this card was supposed to be like the best thing ever. I mean, I guess we'll get into that later, but yeah, we'll talk about it.
Yeah. It's sort of a sad state of the UFC that this is the best that they could come up with for like such a seminal event. And if I remember correctly, there was even some back and forth with Donald Trump being like, what is this that you're offering, and saying, can we get some more fights on this? But yeah, so it's, but it's the best that they could do. It's not a bad card. None of us are complaining when we watch some of the worst fight night cards known to man in the Paramount Plus era. So
At least the Saudis had the courage to stand up and demand they change the card.
that's right. Yeah, exactly. If they had just slightly more authoritative, autocratic power, then maybe we would get an even better card. So yeah, let's jump into it. We're going to start with the first fight, Diego Lopes versus Steve Garcia. The odds on this one, Diego Lopes a favorite at -165 when I pulled all these odds last night. And he's up against, like I said, Steve Garcia, who's a small underdog at +132. And the person who has the pleasure of breaking down this first fight of the evening, should be an action-packed one, is Dan Tom. Sorry, two Dans. I will get that straight throughout the night. But Dan Tom, please go ahead and give us your thoughts on this first fight.
So interesting fight. Obviously, going to be a banger. Good fight to start the card. They're not like, of course, the matchmakers still had to force feed us middleweights. We'll get to that. But for the big cards, they actually will begrudgingly go with Joe Silva's style and open up their main card, which we're just going to call everything the main card, because let's be honest, this is by far the best thing. There's plenty to pick at, but by far the best thing about the card, guys, that no one's talking about is that it's only 7 fights. With Pride 33, one of the best cards of all time was 9 fights. People that haven't been watching MMA don't realize what it was like when they actually focused on quality. So this is good quality to start. I'll just try to keep it somewhat short to leave some meat on the bone, but got to talk about some southpaw stats because Steve Garcia is a southpaw. I had him as my under the radar fighter of the year. And then those have aged pretty well. I have Melquizo Costa after that because they fought and Melky went on a run after losing to Steve Garcia with some ground and pound, which could be interesting if he's able to stay safe from subs because, we have seen Diego Lopes kind of relent to fighting on his back, especially as fights go on. This fight could have some weird stuff. It is outdoors, right? There's humidity, all this weird stuff. But the interesting thing about Diego Lopes is the camp that he comes from. Now he had this Brazilian Warriors camp with Alejandro Costa that they started, and he was a coach for some time and still has affiliation with the Lopes gym. And Lopes gym, as you guys know, is one of the worst gyms as far as fighting southpaws. It's just a regression series with Valentina Shevchenko really showing their asses. The circling in complete circles with Arina Aldana versus Holly Holm. And when you look at Diego Lopes, he hasn't really fought southpaws. He's only fought one. He's 1-0. He fought Gavin Tucker, and of course that was a very fast fight that ended in submission. So not too much to take away from it. Also was 3 years ago, right? And he's not really, again, even with those previous camps, he's been doing his last 3 camps or so over at OSU, Oklahoma State University, which for those who don't know is a very renowned wrestling camp. And that would be a good sign if you're a Diego Lopes fan who is favored to win this fight. I know we're going to be I'll give picks where I can, and I know you guys will where you can too. It's not a main focus here. But if Diego Lopes does wrestle and pursue his grappling edge on paper, obviously he's got a much better chance to win this fight and earn his favorite spot. But as you guys know, and I'll let you guys touch on it, you guys were just talking about fighter trends, right? And there's those weird things where there's those fighters who are wrestlers and don't use their wrestling, or they work on their wrestling a lot and they work with a high level wrestling camp and all their training partners talk about how underrated their wrestling is, right? And we never really see it, and then there are those fighters that they have really good strength and conditioning and they've always had good cardio, it's never been a problem, but later in their career and all the workout and pre-fight specials, they're just obsessed with their cardio, and it's well, that's not the problem, Michael Chandler, or maybe it is with him, but you know what I'm talking about. There's those weird things, and I'm curious of is Diego Lopes, if you guys want to touch on this as I'm going to pass the ball on here in a second, but is Diego Lopes one of those guys who's not going to pursue his advantages as much as he perhaps should? And not to get into the woo-woo narrative, right? But as we've also seen, I don't like to be too tinfoil hat guys, right? Because fighters will just do random stuff sometimes. But as we've seen with this Paramount Plus era, both the UFC booking as well as their not so subtle encouraging of fighters to not grapple, from Hunter Campbell to Dana White, you wonder about that. And then with the stakes of this card and everybody's going to want to show out and get the bonuses and all that stuff, this is the one card where you're probably encouraged to not grapple.
You think they'll do some Kimbo Slice conversation in the back room? Don't put Trump to sleep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna post my Hunter Campbell meme where he's in the trench coat and it says less wrestling. But yeah, so I think that Steve Garcia is a live dog here, but I'll pass it on to Dan Albert as I'm really curious what your guys' thoughts are.
Yeah, so my feelings on this, I'm going to restrict to some striking stuff. I freely admit I don't understand Garcia as well as I think I do Lopes. So I'll start with Lopes from the top. Lopes really is all about the counter punching on an air trigger. He usually makes that happen through like touching opponents behind the jab, or like lead right counter for my money, and constantly employs a presence, which means he doesn't mind if the exchanges go longer because he can just kick them really hard or just hit them back, usually with a 3-4 counter as a favorite of his. The thing about Lopes, as we all know, is that he just has very set phases of success, but he's the kind of guy that if you underestimate or are reckless against, you're probably going to get hurt really, really badly, or you'll find an opportunism moment that doesn't go well for you. And so in context of looking at Garcia, I think Garcia offers him a lot of great looks for this fight, mainly behind the throwaways and feints, because those can dole a lot of counters. And based upon some success, I've seen some fighters, interestingly, like Brian Ortega, switching back and forth between Southpaw and their fight. Like he manages to like find his way back into it against Lopes and kind of dole some of those KO triggers. I do like Garcia's like constantly touching jab to kind of set up the overhand. And the thing about Garcia that makes this really concerning is that I do think he's a bit reliant upon the volume. And again, that just kind of makes it naturally very dangerous against someone like Lopes. The thing is, I don't know really much about Garcia's game outside of that from a striking sense. But I do think it's very likely this fight will probably start very fast. And if Garcia doesn't get murdered on the counter, I think he can make it a more uncomfortable fight for Lopes than some are expecting. And yeah, that's all I got on that one. Miguel?
Yeah, so I think some of the things you guys both already said there like really resonated with me when I was sort of looking through both of these guys. It is easier to get a grasp on Lopes just because we've seen him in these, big long fights with Volk and other people. So we've seen him against the top of the division and we've already seen his ceiling. And Garcia's just had a bunch of weird fights against some old guys and some early finishes. So it's, we just don't have that much data on him. We know, like Dan Tom said, he's a southpaw. He's very aggressive, a volume fighter, and he's got this like kind of funny, janky, proactive head movement. I think he's like more of like one of these natural strikers, and I say that like sort of trying to be favorable to him in the sense that he has a good feel for things, and it's more effective than it looks in terms of mechanics and actual technique, because that's just the nature of MMA. You can just get a lot done by being aggressive, and I think those southpaw dynamics are really key because even though Lopes dropped Volk when they were an open stance, that's really by the nature of Volk being kind of silly when he's fighting somebody who's southpaw and always like trying to shift in and close the distance. And Lopes happened to catch him with a right hook from southpaw when Volkanovski was trying to shift in. But the rest of the time, all you really saw was Lopes trying to kick a lot from southpaw. A part of that was because he wanted to try and cut off Volkanovski and, forgot that fighters can move 2 directions instead of just one. And he was trying to use the open side body kick to cut him off. But, most of the time he was just feinting from range. But he doesn't have any really good range tools because his kicks are not great. Just mechanically, he cannot get a lot done with his kicks. Now I say that he's probably gonna like knock Garcia out with a kick or something. That's the nature of MMA. But I talked to Ryan about this after the fight, but it's like, I don't know if you guys remember, he broke both of his feet against Volkanovski because he just cannot get hip rotation on his kicks, and he like flicks out his foot, and like Volk blocked one in like I think it was the 5th round, and like broke his foot and had him stumbling around. And so it's like, if that's his main range tool in like the longer open stance matchup is just kicks, and his favorite combination, Dan Albert, you mentioned that he's, like a hair trigger counter fighter. His favorite combination, he does it like every single time, is a rear uppercut lead hook. Doesn't probably work as well in the open stance for him, or at least I haven't seen it working well from him. He still has that right hook there, but that's about it. So I think his options in open stance are just really limited. But I mean, this is just one of those fights, like a lot of these fights that we'll see on this card, where attributes and athleticism and things like that probably make a huge difference. And that makes it really hard for me to pick Garcia, just because the margins are going to be way thinner for him. I don't think he's like as bad of an MMA athlete as he probably seems like, and he's pretty scrambly even in ground situations and stuff. But Lopes is undoubtedly very dangerous, huge, massive, can just like take any shot with, like he just got hit over and over again by Volk and even people like Jean Silva. And it's just like, for some reason, his chin is totally ironclad. It's not fair. We should give it to somebody who's better. But that's a little bit not fair for me to say that. But either way, I think I'm going to take a little bit of a risk here in picking Steve Garcia, just because I don't like the way Lopes looks against in that open stance. And the funny thing, like Dan Tom mentioned, he was the one forcing the open stance against Volk. Like, it's not like he's fought a lot of southpaws. He was going into southpaw and trying to figure out open stance stuff. I think he's going to look even more awkward against an actual committed southpaw who is aggressive and a volume fighter and will probably just throw a lot more than him. Now, he could definitely get sparked with a right hook or something like that, but I don't know. That's at least the way that I'm reading it. So I'm picking Garcia. It's I know he's an underdog, but I guess my opinion of Diego Lopes outside of his grappling is relatively low. And the problem is despite whatever he's doing with his wrestling, I've never seen him have any sort of a coherent wrestling entry game that bridges his striking to his grappling. He gets in grappling situations out of like random, like non-repeatable circumstances all the time. It's like, I think against John Silva, it was like John Silva missed a spinning back kick and he, took him down with a body lock off of that and, got some other weird sort of scramble. So if something like that happens, which is very likely to happen with Steve Garcia, then yeah, we could just end up with Lopes crushing him on the ground. But I think based off the striking dynamics, which I think is more likely to play out because Lopes just doesn't have those reliable wrestling entries, that's why I'm picking Garcia. So probably a little bit too long-winded for me on such a fight, but hopefully, I guess, Ryan Wagner, you'll probably be a little bit more brief on this fight, right?
Yeah, as I've admitted to them already, I've seen very little of Steve Garcia. I've probably seen like 4 minutes of him fighting in total, so I don't have a great read on him. I think there are a lot of things about Lopes that make him difficult, that make a long southpaw difficult for him, though. He tends to rely on closed side leg kicks, the outside leg kick from both orthodox fighters, and he has a jab now and again, but it's mostly like his lead hook. And he's not very good at closing distance. Those are going to be tricky to play against a long southpaw. With Steve Garcia, from what I've seen of him, he seems to have some kind of like in and out long guy stuff at range, but also a lot of messy swarming. He'll go and rush guys, double up on his rear hand and like kind of try and fight in the pocket, where he uses some of his like, he's one of those tall guys who can kind of do a lot of nice work inside with those punches from weird angles. And that makes it really hard for a lot of guys to kind of like get a read on him and defend. But for someone like Lopes, I think that's going to expose Garcia to a lot of what Lopes does well. Whereas if he's more patient and conservative, then Lopes probably has trouble tracking him down. I think another relevant thing here is that Lopes is really, he's like a shark in transitions. If he smells an opening to pair striking with his grappling, he'll instantly pounce on it, and he can just kind of go crazy for like 5 to 7 seconds with that. And we haven't gotten a look at it in a while because he doesn't get to play that game at all against elite fighters. When he's fighting someone like Volkanovski or Movsar Evloev, it just doesn't work. His wrestling isn't good enough. He's not good enough in the clinch. His entries aren't slick enough to make them react to one of those threats and get into the other thing. But with someone like Steve Garcia, I could see something like one of them getting into an exchange. They kind of unconsciously reach for a clinch, and then Lopes kind of like maybe threatens an overhook throw and blasts him with a 4-punch combination. That's the kind of thing I could see working against someone like Steve Garcia, where Lopes hasn't gotten to do it a lot recently. Again, I don't have a great read on it since I don't know much about Steve Garcia, but from what I've seen, he can be kind of messy. He steps forward really uncautiously quite a bit, and Lopes is really dangerous in those kind of like dynamic exchanges. So I think it's pretty likely that Lopes either catches him in a furious exchange somewhere or hits him with a moment of transitional brilliance and finishes him.
And I guess it's my turn to talk about the fight. Yeah, this one is interesting because, I mean, Steve Garcia relies a lot on being like a big, durable guy. He faces Lopes here, who is like more durable, bigger. But other than that, Garcia is like a very janky kind of guy. He fights out of Jackson Wink. I think he might be the last like Jackson Wink ranked guy in the sport right now. But he is not like your classic like Winklejohn kind of fighter because he has like a more coherent, consistent output out there. But he still has some of the eccentricities of the style, a lot of pot shotting. But at the same time, he does some stuff that in theory is pretty nice. Like he attacks covering hands, attacks the body, takes an angle, that kind of stuff. He has some like good concepts here and there, but the execution is very janky. And Lopes sits like on the other side of the spectrum to that. He's a very big guy that doesn't have a lot of ideas, but he has like mechanically very sharp with the punching. He punches very hard and very tight. And as Ryan was saying, like he has these like opportunistic moments to transition to his grappling, and his grappling is terrifying. The way he mauled like Jean Silva from Mount was very impressive. He's a very scary guy to have in top position. And we obviously won't get to see the guard of Diego Lopes in this one. He's not going to be taken down. His takedown defense has looked very solid, actually. Lately in fights, it seems like he shifted that part of his game because he was a guy that was very willing to play guard up to his UFC debut. And against Iployev, he played a lot of guard. And his guard is actually very dangerous, actually a solid guard for MMA. But he can be neutralized for sure. If you go back and watch his contender series about against Tuvarao, he was like getting beat from top position against a fellow like super athletic grappler. But that's not going to be the case here. As most of you said, it seems like Lopes is going to struggle against a guy that is just as long as him and is a southpaw and is putting like a constant volume out there, because Diego Lopes doesn't have many ideas in open stance matchups. He doesn't fight hands a lot. I don't think he's going to find a reliable jab in this fight. But what Diego Lopes has is that he's very durable, and he reminds me a bit of like Cody Garbrandt in the case that just as soon as he senses that there's like he has the good distance to strike, he just puts like 3s and 2s together to try to kill you. But he does that without any of the finesse of the footwork of Cody Garbrandt. He just stands there and tries to kill you with hooks from both sides or hooks and straights. But that might just work here because, as I said, like Garcia has a lot of good attributes, but he relies a lot on being big and durable. And he's fighting like the final boss of big and durable at 145 here. And it's hard to not see like Garcia like swarming like clumsily and getting just tagged with like 3 punches in succession. And if this one goes to the ground, you know it's game over for him. Like he's a solid grappler. He has shown to be. Actually, like him like smashing Melk from top position when he was trying to go for leg locks was actually impressive. But I would say Diego Lopes is a different level of grappler to Melquisa Acosta. So yeah, I gotta pick Diego here. I think even if this one goes to decision, which is not super likely, I can see Diego like still having like the biggest moments of the rounds. So my pick here is Diego Lopes by Clove and Sov on round 2, I guess.
Awesome. Yeah. So first fight, we probably had a little bit more to say than we maybe even thought we did. But you guys, especially Ryan and Fenyo, probably making the smart pick there with Diego Lopes, I think. And we'll see exactly how it plays out. All of us sort of recognizing the issues with the open stance and sort of the limitations of both Diego and Steve's game. The next fight, we'll probably get through a little bit even more quickly, slightly less relevant, but probably more important for the promoters. It's Bo Nickal, who's at minus 335 versus Kyle Daukaus at plus 250. So big favorite by Bo Nickal. And I don't know if I tortured you, Dan Albert, by making you watch a lot of Bo Nickal and Kyle Daukaus tape. So let me know if you enjoyed that process and what great insights you got from it.
Buddy, I once explained Jessica I on a podcast with Fenley. You can't hurt me. Okay, so I'm going to keep like some things about the wrestling and grappling to others who are better equipped to discuss that. So Nickal's whole deal on the feet is that it's very meat and potatoes. I think my read on him is he's very reliant upon like making setups, mainly the double threat improvements that he showed against Vieira, though to be fair, Vieira offered him like nothing in the process. So it's not the most reliable way of reading how much he's improved as a striker. But again, it's still very meat and potatoes, kind of relies upon a slow pace, kind of being able to like create setups. And he does have rhythm manipulations with the level changes. I think, interestingly, he kind of likes to lead more with the rear hand in, because I do find his jab a bit inconsistent. And in context of looking at that against like Daukaus on the feet, I can see is it Daukaus or Daukaus? I don't know. He might give him some annoying looks because he really likes to probe with that lead hand and counter off of longer changes. And every time I've seen Nickal like put on the back foot, like he constantly throws and kind of swings upstairs, which kind of opens him up to tie-ups because he'll lose his feet consistently. So I can see like him getting exposed to like some intercepting collar tie attacks axed by Daukaus. But on the other hand, I also kept seeing Daukaus get murdered by Eric Anders of all people. Well, in that kind of sense, I think it's kind of a question of if the exchanges go longer. I think if it's kind of a game of like slow chicken, Nickal can probably get the better of like the stand-up. But I think if things go a bit longer, then I think Nickal might struggle a lot and might not like what he's having on the feet unless he's able to hit a good counter. As for the clinch, it's decent for control and activity. His transitions might help him, but I don't really know how well he can play against Daukaus on the ground. So I'll leave that up to other people to talk about. I would say this is kind of well matched. It might be a deceptively hard fight for Nickal on the feet if it stays there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that part of it being a hard fight on the feet is I'm pretty sure both these guys are southpaws, right? Although I'll leave the stats up to Dan Tom later. But I'm guessing that Daukaus has fought more southpaws than Bo Nickal, and he's probably a bit more natural in that close stance matchup. But this is really a fight I think you can just pick on athleticism. Not that I think that Bo Nickal has a particularly high ceiling. He is getting better, but it's all in these like sort of blank canvas matchups like Vieira, where who's looked pretty atrocious in all of his surrounding fights as well, where it's really hard to make much of it, and we know that even at this stage in his career, Nickal is not as much of a green prospect as he sort of seems like. I think that they sort of still kind of promote him and talk about him as like, he was like this prodigy and he's still at the very beginning of his career, but we've seen like way more prodigious talents like come in and look better after, however many years he's been fighting. It's been long enough that he's getting better, but if he was going to end up being like a championship material, now when I say that, it's still middleweight division, so I could be aiming too high here, but still I think if he was going to end up somewhere really high, we probably would have already seen something to sort of indicate that for us. And mostly it's that he does have cool transitional offense sometimes, like Dan just pointed out there. Obviously, like when he gets in these dynamic wrestling exchanges, he's very good. But we don't really see him putting together a very cohesive game plan where he really understands how to take control of a fight and then how to adapt when things go slightly awkward for him, as they obviously did in that Rayner de Ritter fight. So, and you know, his limitations in the clinch there are very bad for somebody that ostensibly wants to get into the clinch a lot with people, and there's limitations there, but it's still like, you know, like Dan Albert pointed out, it's like Daukaus is still the guy that got like totally beat up by Eric Anders, you know. And yeah, that was a long time ago, you know, 3 years or so, and has looked better since coming to the UFC again. And but it's like he's had 2-0 fights against Gerald Meerschaert, and he knocked out Michel Pereira off of a right hook as he tried to circle away. That was cool, but it was like, I don't know, that's not a super repeatable thing that I've seen. So I'm just picking Bo Nickal basically off of athleticism here. Obviously, that's why they booked this fight on this card as well, is because they want to give Bo Nickal a winnable matchup. And it seems like it's harder for them to find them. And so they brought somebody like Daukaus, who was, you know, had a failed stint in the UFC and is clearly doesn't have a super high ceiling in the division for Bo Nickal to probably get a finish on. So I'm picking Nickal here, probably just you know, running out there early, tossing him on his head, finding some transitional offense, maybe a submission. Although it's, again, I'm not sure exactly how good a submission game is, since we've only really seen him find it against people that have like basically nothing, and Daukaus is not that bad of a grappler. So if I remember correctly, but that's basically what it is. I think Nickal probably by an early finish, and if it's not an early finish, then it probably is not going to be that great of a fight, but he'll probably just still win by having the bigger moments, sort of like what these guys said about Diego Lopes in the other fight. So that's all that I have for that one, and I don't know how much more we can keep adding to this, but I'll see if you have any thoughts, because we have our resident sort of freestyle wrestling expert here in Ryan Wagner. So what are your thoughts on Bo Nickal and how he's transitioned from his folk style career into MMA?
I kind of echo your guys' thoughts on Nickal, and that his biggest problem is a lack of coherency. He doesn't really have a lot of ways to win fights. In terms of pure wrestling, he's obviously fantastic. And he's got a really good upper body game in MMA. His shots are not great. He has a couple kind of basic setups, but he doesn't really have the eyes or the comfort to kind of play around in close in the feet, wait for somebody to take a swing and open up their elbow, and then get in clean on the hips. So a lot of the takedown options he has are kind of high energy, where he'll struggle to get in clean, and then he has to push them to the cage, finish with by dragging them down to the ground or moving to the upper body. And that was a big problem against Rayner de Ritter, where de Ritter could just take a strong overhook, stick him in the clinch for a while, and then in those positions, Nickal is doing nothing but wrestling, where de Ritter was able to pick away at him. I don't know a lot about Kyle Daukaus. I don't think I've seen any of his full fights, just a couple clips on Twitter. But he seemed to develop some nice hands lately. He had that knockout at one of his outside the UFC bouts lately, where he kind of stood his ground and hit a nice open side counter against a guy coming in on him. He had the knockout against Michel Pereira. Both of those were in open stance fights, and this will be Nickal is a southpaw, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so this will be a closed stance. I don't know how he is there, but his hands are definitely a lot more comfortable than Nickal's. I think that Daukaus is kind of live for a first round finish, and depending on the odds, I'm sure the odds are really long there. That might not be a terrible bet. I don't know much about Daukaus's wrestling or his clinch game, and that's kind of the big thing going against him. If he can keep it on the feet with Nickal, I think Nickal, his process on the feet, his depth of skill is probably not good enough to avoid getting hurt. But if he can take down Daukaus consistently, keep him down, then he should do his thing. But that's going to be really difficult for Nickal to play against, as he moves up in the middleweight division. There's probably not a whole lot of guys he can do that to. And we've seen that in his last couple fights too. Against Adolfo Vieira, of course, he didn't want to wrestle too much. Against Paul Craig, he didn't want to take him down and get on top of him. And then de Ritter dragged him into the clinch and kind of drowned him there. So I don't know how much further Nickal can go with this game if he doesn't develop some more coherency, some ways to fit his grappling with his striking, some ways to hurt guys in the clinch and on the ground, so that he doesn't have to just rely on staying on top the whole fight to win. I'm going to pick Nickal, but I wouldn't be too surprised if he falters here and gets finished early. Now, what do you think, Fenio?
I feel like this fight like plays two roles for the UFC and Bo Nickal's career, because this is not only like to get a Bo Nickal win, but I feel like it's also like a redemption, because he's facing like someone that is a very similar archetype to RDR here. Daukaus also like this very tall, like lanky, janky grappler that has some skills on the feet. The big difference here is that Daukaus is not as enormous as the Reader. He's pretty big, but he's like a lot skinnier too. And also, he's a lot more technical as a striker, but RDR has that like insane durability and grit. He has that dog in him. Not saying that Kyle Daukaus doesn't have that dog in him, but RDR just like can rely on being like a very big, durable guy to win fights. And Kyle Daukaus, I don't think he is that guy that can do that, but he does bring like interesting looks to the table. When two southpaws fight each other, I feel like even though neither of these guys are very, very well experienced on close distance matchup, I mean, Daukaus has a lot of fights, but he still doesn't have tons of experience against southpaws. But I gotta side with on the feet. I gotta side with the more experienced guy, the more technical guy on the baseline. Like Bo Nickal has decent mechanics on most of his strikes, but he's still a bit of a mess. He's very single shot oriented, repositioning. He's very uncomfortable in exchanges. Bo Nickal is going to be like by far the quicker guy in this fight, even though Bo Nickal, for all his like hyper athletic accolades, he's not that quick. Honestly, he's a good athlete, but he's not like Joel Romero out there. And Daukaus has been showing some good pop, some power, and some crafty in the way he set up his hands, as Ryan just said. So the thing is that Daukaus is like, he's good everywhere, right? But that's I feel like the jack of all trades when you're not a super good athlete is not a super good game to play, especially when you have like Bo Nickal is a specialist on paper, but I'm not so sure he's a specialist in MMA, because what is the thing that Bo Nickal does very good against elite fighters? We really don't know. I have the feeling that if this one gets sketchy, Bo Nickal might want to go to his grappling on this one. And if he gets takedowns, Daukaus is a very crafty grappler, but I feel like Bo Nickal can probably stay safe from top position. So I think that Daukaus is going to give him some looks on the feet, but Bo Nickal will be able to like smother him against the cage without doing much damage, find some takedowns here and there, and maybe land the bigger shots. But that one is kind of like a coin flip. You have Daukaus being more technical and the more experienced southpaw here against Bo Nickal, who is clearly the more dynamic guy and the guy who has a stronger threat of the takedown here. But all things considered, I think that Bo Nickal, when he fights a higher level position, his danger is very diminished. We saw that head kick against Rodolfo Vieira, but it was Rodolfo Vieira who was like mentally defeated already, and I don't think that Bo Nickal is entering a head kick era here. He's not going to head kick everyone that he fights. I very much doubt so. So my pick is that Bo Nickal wins a decision that is not as exciting as they want him to have.
All right. I think that Bo Nickal can stay safe, and I definitely think that the paths you guys laid out are his paths to win this. And I do also agree on your guys' criticism as far as like Bo Nickal's game being pretty incoherent. Like you can tell he's getting comfortable with being a southpaw by acting like a southpaw and just abusing open stance matchups and really firing from the left. But I don't like that for his wrestling game and the fact that he's a wrestler who is a right-handed southpaw apparently. And you see it maybe like when he has choices to swing on the ground in the very few instances where he'll do ground and pound, he really loads up on the right, he's a right-handed southpaw. And as a right-handed southpaw, I judge him doubly hard and am extra critical for the fact that I know it's MMA and like none of them do, but for the fact that he doesn't have a lead hand. And durable southpaws who can wrestle was something I said a long time ago, back when like talking about guys like Rick Story. Like I remember betting Rick Story as like a +2, same number as Daukaus is now, right? +270 underdog to beat Thiago Alves. If you guys remember that one back in the day. And it wasn't the most popular pick, and Alves still had heat, you know, even though his title challenges were behind him even at that point. But, you know, durable guys who can wrestle and, you know, from the southpaw stance and fight from the southpaw stance are problems. And southpaw versus southpaw really throws it out, because as a southpaw, I can tell you, and I always say this all the time, but nobody hates fighting southpaws than other southpaws. And that goes true for like experience, not just martial artists, but like strikers in particular. Like that can be your shit. But you get another southpaw and it flips it on its head. You guys have spoke about this in your own analysis before, where I will have similar keys. It's not a rule of thumb because there is not an MMA, but yes, you look at who has the better lead hand in those southpaw versus southpaw matchups when they get extended, especially, right? The series between Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor show that. But speaking of Dustin Poirier and other fighters, I heard someone mentioned, I think it was my guy Dan Albert there, mentioned the Eric Anders fight, right? So here's their southpaw stats, a southpaw versus southpaw matchup. Bo Nickal is 1-1 against UFC level lefties. That first one that he won was against Jamie Pickett. Not a very high, enhancement talent, some might call it. No disrespect to the Night Wolf there, but that's clearly what he was brought in to be. Not even a jack of all trades. You can't even call Pickett that, right? And in that matchup, Bo Nickal actually comes out orthodox. He does the Machida, because again, no one hates southpaws and other southpaws. Even guys as slick as Machida, the few times Machida would get a southpaw, he'd go orthodox, because they love that open stance look, and that's what Bo Nickal does before shooting like 20 seconds into the fight. Nothing to take there. So I wasn't sold, and I actually took Renier de Ridder, who is the other sample in the column, in the lost column for Bo Nickal, right? Because again, not a great wrestler. Not even super durable. Like, I don't think either Daukaus or de Ridder are the most durable, but I think you could argue, for a reason I'm going to get here in a second and tie in that Poirier note, I think you could argue Daukaus is a little more durable, in fact, and even a little more proven, right? Not to be UFC over one bias. Kyle Daukaus also did a lot of work in the respectable CFFC organization. Perhaps I'm biased since I now do a little bit of work for them, but he had some good highlights there that Ryan Wagner pointed out. And yeah, I took a RDR to beat Bo Nickal, cash big there. That was nice, yada, yada. But then Bo Nickal comes out and looks good against Adolfo Vieira, who's not a southpaw. And he is showing a little bit more jabs there, but it's still a lot of open hand look. And again, you know, even though I took Vieira there, it's one of those things where Vieira really hasn't looked good, you know. And I can joke and be like, you know, kind of like with Tom Nolan and ZM this last weekend, and even Bilal and Bonfim, although I should have known better to stay away from that one. Whenever there's a fighter that over does their expectation and looks great, and conversely at the same time the other fighter looks worse than normal, go look at to see who I bet, and there's like a 99% chance I bet on the guy who, you know, looks horrible, and of course the other guy looks great. So you know, all jokes aside though, I don't know how much to put into that value, right? And then on the other side you got Kyle Daukaus, who he's actually 2-1 against UFC level lefties. He also has a win against Jamie Pickett, where he showed even early, you know, that fight was earlier in his career, showed really good tactics, lead hand, accurate, putting combinations together, which is kind of Daukaus's game, because he's got a very similar game to RDR. He's got, you know, not the most sexy striking. It's a bit, you know, janky and weird in his own ways, but I think he's much more technical than de Ridder, much more defensively responsible. Although, is he the most defensively responsible? No, he's a tall UFC middleweight, but more defensively responsible. Does things like hand traps, collar ties, which are big, and for the reasons that my guy Dan Albert mentioned. He'll throw more kicks, and everything just looks more meaningful. And he's striking in combination, can counter, looks good in extended combinations, not afraid to grapple. And I don't think that'll be the craziest thing here, because again, you just want to pressure Nickal. And the other win he has, of course, is last time out against GM3, Gerald Mearshart. I love GM3, but we know Gerald can get caught early, so maybe you don't want to give that too much credit. But as far as the criticism for his lone loss, this is interesting. So that Eric Anders fight, and he gets a lot of crap, especially like MMA gambling Twitter, right? They're like, oh, he's a quitter. And if you look at it, like, man, there's easier ways to quit a fight than getting knocked down like 6 times or whatever it was. I'm not going to look at the stats because the stats are bullshit, but getting literally, I just watched the fight knocked down like, almost like 6 times or whatever. Like, there were plenty of times and a lot easier ways to quit a fight than that, folks. And second of all, I'm surprised he didn't quit earlier, not only because, say what you will about Eric Anders, I'm one of his harshest critics. The guy has so many wins he doesn't even deserve on there. GM3 outboxed him. I stick to that. Screw that split decision. Go watch that fight, right? That being said, Eric Anders does have these fights, usually when I bet against him, where he actually will look aggressive, right? And that's where he earns his hype, even though it's all bullshit. I'm tired of hearing about the Alabama football player stuff. Like, guys, Brendan Schaub is the best football player to have transferred to UFC. Can we give up that great white hope? Can we stop it, please? But like, yeah, Eric Anders would get a lot of hype, but part of the reason was because of performances like that. Now, the reason why I bring up Dustin Poirier here is because remember when Poirier fought Joe Duffy? And I don't know what the odds are, but I think the odds would surprise a lot of people today if we went back and looked at it, because the narrative as well was that Joe Duffy might be winning this one. He's on his way up. Are we going to get the rematch with Conor McGregor? Like, these were those times. And Dustin Poirier was coming off of I don't know if it was a knockout loss or so much of like a broken nose. And we see broken nose in orbitals. When fighters come back from it, win or lose, it's sketchy, right? We saw Jessica Penne she probably would have lost to Jessica Andrade 10 times out of 10 times, but she came back from that nose surgery. She got clipped. She did not like it, right? She crumbled. Josh Koscheck after GSP, right? His lasted longer than a fight. His lasted the rest of his career, where he's just pawing at his eye, right? And Dustin Poirier, you even see that Joe Duffy fight. He gets his nose busted, and Poirier has the skills and the tactics all day to beat Joe Duffy. But if you watch the fight, it was more of a mental thing. He had to talk himself into it. That's why he's getting so passionate and shit talking and so emotional, because Dustin really had to. That was like the beginning of Dustin talking himself through the wars run. And I just say that to say that win or lose, it's a tough thing for fighters to come back from. And Daukaus actually had his orbital shattered from a knee from Roman Dolidze before that. And a long-winded, folks, sorry, but just context matters, right? And he had his whole orbital, his shit just shattered from Roman Dolidze on a knee. So all those things, Eric's power alone, Anders's power alone, the shots he connect with could have knocked out anybody or made anybody quit, for one. But even half those shots, when you're going in with the psychological issue of an orbital, how much does that affect you, for 2? And for 3, not only did Daukaus have to eat those and keep fighting, which he did to his valiantness and credit, but there's also one of the worst head clashes I've ever seen also happens in the round before Daukaus even gets stopped. Of course, Daukaus is on the wrong end of it, and of course it's on the orbital side, and of course he is pawing like the aforementioned Josh Koscheck for the rest of the fight. So I only say that to say, how hard do we really want to be on Daukaus for that one? Not saying anybody is, but just for the sake of conversation and for the sake of justifying my dog pick. Now, I don't know if I'm going to pick Diego Lopes in the last fight. I kind of agree with Ryan Wagner pretty much saying, like, it's going to be chin bullying and his skills that are going to bail him out as per usual, right? But I'll be a little more committed with you guys. I'll go ahead and I will pick Daukaus. Daukaus is back. Daukaus of the White House. Who would have thought? Shout out to like the 150-year-old who got that joke. But yeah, give me Daukaus here.
With the stupid helmet.
Yeah, I'm gonna be abusing that gift this weekend.
I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, Michael Daukaus. Donnie Darko references Daukaus. You're voting for Daukaus? I'm voting for Daukaus, guys.
Amazing. I love it. And that does it for the second fight. That brings us to the third one, which I think this, if I'm not mistaken, is either the biggest odds on the card in terms of the betting odds, or just only second to the main event. But it's Mauricio Ruffy at minus 625 versus Michael Chandler at plus 450. So it's up to me to start breaking this down first, and it's clear why they got Michael Chandler on the card, and it's a hilarious matchup for him because he's been spending, the better part of his elder years chasing after Conor McGregor, and they give him the Brazilian imitation instead. And on the White House card, presumably so that he can feel like he can be an American hero. But I mean, I would be surprised if anybody here is going to pick him because despite Ruffy having some clear issues that like have been seen very clearly in his recent fights, this is just a fight that's very clear to pick on momentum. Michael Chandler, for example, the Paddy Pimblett fight should have been a way more winnable fight for him, or just a fight that he shouldn't have looked so dreadful in, and he looked like absolute dog shit in that fight. So that is essentially where all of my thoughts go in this pick, is just how far Michael Chandler has fallen from his heights. I think in his prime, he probably rinses Mauricio Ruffy. Maybe that's a more interesting discussion for us to have, but somebody that moves forward behind feints, pressures, and mixes up a wrestling threat with a dynamic, very powerful, athletic striking game, probably gives Ruffy some real problems. Now, there's always a chance that Ruffy could spark Michael Chandler out even in his prime, but that seems like way more likely now when Michael Chandler just doesn't really know what to do. He's either going to blow his wad early and then and with some sort of a chaotic attack early on and then completely fall apart, or he's just going to circle around and strafe and do nothing and then try that later. He pretty much just has like one big offensive sprint or something like that. And it's not even like we really saw that against Paddy Pimblett, so that might not even be there. So that's essentially where all my thoughts go as far as how to pick the matchup. There are some interesting things you could probably say about Ruffy and where he goes, and he's, obviously got more of a future than Michael Chandler. Overall, my thoughts on Ruffy is that, like, if anything, if Michael Chandler was going to really try to come in with an offensive wrestling game, then, well, obviously Ruffy looked pretty clueless in the body lock against Benoit Saint Denis. Ruffy's cage craft is pretty poor, and he really needs a lot of space to operate with his game, but he cannot seem to manage the real estate well enough to demand what he needs. But the thing is he's really great at finding these like single shot openings, and even when fights are getting tough, like his fight with Fiziev, he can find that big opening because he's just very fast. He's athletic. He covers a lot of distance and those attributes cover for like the lack of fundamentals. And I guess I should say in terms of fundamentals, it's like he has a nice jab that he was using against Fiziev, for example, and he should probably be throwing it all the time rather than a lot of the flashy stuff that he does. And it is what got him the win against Fiziev because he was constantly nailing him with it, and then he feinted it to step into that huge right hand that started the downfall. But it just seems like he's more interested in trying to do something cool and set it up, and he's constantly thinking about that. And so somebody like a prime Chandler who would give him a lot to think about might be more difficult for him, or just might repeat what Benoit Saint Denis did. But still, at this stage, it just seems like a very easy layup for Ruffy. And I guess the most that we could hope is that we get to see some sort of a classic Chandler buffoonery at some point in the fight before he probably inevitably gets slept. So that's really my only thoughts on this fight. And I'm not sure. I remember, Ryan Wagner, you wrote or edited a pretty awesome video on Michael Chandler back in the day. So you're very familiar with him in his prime. What do you think about his current state?
Yeah, I agree with you that there's a lot that Chandler could have done in his prime, and I think he probably would have dominated Ruffy. Ruffy really likes the Conor McGregor style step back counters and the shoulder roll, and Chandler was really good at closing distance in open space. One thing he especially liked, he would throw a long range straight right hand to the body, and then when guys caught on to that, he'd show it, change levels, then leap forward with a leaping or shifting left hook. And he got a lot of guys standing upright with that because they were looking at the body shot. That's how he knocked out Hooker. With Ruffy liking the shoulder roll so much, that would be a really great move for him when he rotates his torso inward to cover his chin with his shoulder, it exposes the left hook. But yeah, as it is, maybe like 5 years ago, even 2 or 3 years ago, Chandler got a lot done there. But as it is, this is kind of obviously a waste of time. It's not a serious fight. Chandler is 40 years old. There's no reason to ever expect him to win a UFC fight again. And I'm not saying it's impossible for him to win, but of course, there's no reason to expect it. So Ruffy's going to knock him out pretty early, I think. What do you think, Fanio?
I mean, I'm in agreement here. Chandler looked absolutely trash against Paddy Pimblett. And also, if we remember, like Chandler versus Charles Oliveira the first time around, very competitive. It's not like Chandler just had the one moment and he fell apart later. It was like he got caught and he got finished, but he was very close to finish Oliveira. He dug his way out of oh no, he almost had Oliveira get him, but he escaped of a rear naked choke or something. I think he escaped from a submission, Chandler. But the thing is that on the rematch, he was fighting a worse version of Oliveira that he fought the first time around, and he got like absolutely dominated. Like he got his ass washed in that one. And then Paddy Pimblett was looking like a striker against Michael Chandler, man. And to think that Michael Chandler was having like a war, it was pretty lopsided, but he was standing like toe to toe with Justin Gaethje a few years ago, and then he was like getting dominated by Pimblett on the feet, and then we saw how Pimblett versus Gaethje went, right? So yeah, Michael Chandler is not a real fighter anymore. He's like not there. If he sells out for a rear naked choke on the first round, is maybe his best chance. And even then, Ruffy was looking like solid when it came to defending submissions early on against Benoit Saint-Denis. And to add insult to injury, like Ruffy also, like, one of the few strikes that he does well is like leg kicking. And Michael Chandler, especially at his old age, is designed to get his legs like pumped to the sky. So yeah, it's like this is not a real fight. Ruffy's going to knock him out, I think, on round 2 or 3, because despite all, Chandler is still very tough. But yeah, that's all I have to say. What do you think then, Tom?
Sorry, I'll go a little shorter since I went a little long with the Southpaw versus Southpaw special on that last one. But yeah, I agree with all the notes. This is just tough. It's basically, I agree. Like, I was a big Chandler defender as well early on in his earlier career. So obviously I appreciate all the work my guy Ryan Wag has done on him. I met Chandler back in the day when he was just deciding if he wanted to try to get signed by the UFC or jump into this tournament with this thing called Bellator. He actually was I was training with him way back then in the day. And when people say explosive, I'm like it's guys like Michael Chandler. However, he got away from his the grappling. It's like I think a lot of these were camp changes. He went from Extreme Couture to Alliance, right? And this is around the time where this is right after the first Alvarez fight is when he leaves Couture's. And at Couture's, he wasn't just getting catch wrestling from my coach. He was also getting boxing from a boxing coach I had at the time, a guy named Gil Martinez, Mexican boxing coach. He was a guy who instilled in me and Chandler, not hard enough with Chandler, because you see him stop. Brownie, you all right over there? You're like hyperventilating. Sorry, I have a 100-pound mastiff just breathing like crazy. But rolling under the crosses, right? Like head movement. There's just perfect things for a wrestle boxing archetype. Like he had a catch wrestling coach and a boxing coach. Like that was perfect to staple onto Michael Chandler's folk style wrestling and athleticism. And yeah, we see him, just get away from that. He stops rolling his head movement, stops grappling as much after that Alliance move, right? He's just running into damage. And yeah, he really hasn't been the same. And even when the Conor McGregor fight was originally supposed to happen, like years ago at this point, he was one of the few guys I was going to pick McGregor to win against, and could see why. Maybe that's why it seemed like they were targeting that fight, because maybe they thought so as well. I'm like, if I'm going to pick the McGregor, maybe I'll pick the Brazilian McGregor. I know Ruffy's orthodox fighter, but he has a lot of that swagger. Apparently, he's been working on the grappling defense and stuff with Alexander Volkanovski and company. I don't know how much travel he's been doing. It's been more, kind of teleweb, looking over the camp for this camp. but Volk is down there on site this week. Yeah, I'll take Ruffy too. Probably round 2, or at least I'm hoping round 2, because that's a better number. Because basically the odds are Ruffy round 1, Ruffy round 1 knockout is what probably going to happen the most. But I'm curious what my guy Dan Albert has to say about this one.
Yeah, Hoofy's kind of confusing to me personally. I don't quite understand him yet. Very strange process. Appears to want to counter, or it's where he gets dangerous. I do think he has a very surprising, low-key dexterous pot-shutting jab that lets him press and especially set up a very dangerous lead right off the shoulder feint. His knees to punches constantly like caught Fiziev off guard, even when he had his back to the fence. So that kind of does make it, just to keep this short, if Chandler does want a chance to win, he does need to press behind the jab and counters and probably employ that kind of grappling, because for all intents and purposes, Chandler probably can still start very, very hard. It's just he's not the same guy he used to be even a few years ago, and he's been playing with those margins so much since anyways. So it's not really something to really be super reliant upon, but if he has a shot, it's that. That said, Hoofy's the kind of fighter who's very dangerous and quick enough. Even if I think he's not great on the initiative on the back foot, he's very dynamic, and that's just naturally scary at this point. Now, on the other hand, if Chandler chooses to play neutral or goes on the back foot, I think he dies very, very quickly. So, yes, nothing really more to add than what's already been said.
Awesome. Yeah, so we got through that one pretty quickly, which makes sense because it's, like I said, pretty long odds for Michael Chandler there. The next one is a heavyweight fight between the ridiculous, I was going to say, and insurgent Josh Hokit at minus 375 versus Derrick Lewis at plus 285. Probably a title fight eliminator for Josh Hokit here, I'm guessing. That's part of the reason they want him on this card, if not for just his shtick that he's been doing. But probably no surprise to say that he's a little bit more serious of a contender in the modern heavyweight division than maybe we originally thought he would be, although the bar is very low, so I don't know if anybody had any major thoughts about how he would play out before he came to the UFC. But anyways, the person who's up first for breaking down this fight is Ryan Wagner, and I'm very curious, were you aware of Josh Hokit before he transitioned to MMA? Were you familiar with him from his folk style days, getting crushed by Bo Nickal?
No, I wasn't. I probably watched a couple of his NCAA matches because I watched most of the tournaments Nickal was in, but I didn't recall Hokit from it. I wasn't paying a lot of attention to him either in MMA until his last fight, where he kind of surprised a lot of us. Not a whole lot to say about him technically. The biggest thing with him is his athleticism. He's a kind of on the small side for heavyweight, which is in a lot of ways an advantage. A lot of the best heavyweights weren't hulking, ginormous beasts. They were guys like Fedor, who can shoot themselves forward so quickly that the taller heavyweights couldn't see them coming, couldn't react to them. And in comparison, their strikes came out like molasses. And we saw that a lot against Blades, where Blades had kind of the more technical process-based game, but Hokit was so fast. Blades, in the time it took him to shoot out a jab, Hokit would already be slipping inside of it, closing halfway to Blades' face. And by the time his jab's extended, he eats a hard right hand. And Hokit, of course, is a competent wrestler. I haven't seen his earlier fights. I don't know how well he wrestles offensively, but that's probably not going to matter a whole lot here. In addition to being fast, he has some kind of like basic drawing ability. He can keep out his jab, make you do something in his general direction and then pull back a little bit. He's not great with it. He's mostly kind of full steam ahead, swarming combination puncher, which does expose him a lot to counters. But he can, if you're really predictable, if you're just sitting there doing nothing but waiting for a big swing, he can poke at you a little bit, draw out the swing, and then hit you when you miss. And that's going to come in handy against Derrick Lewis because all he really does is big, incredibly hard swings, and he quits when people start putting pressure on him. Josh Hokit does not quit. That fight against Curtis Blades was totally insane. The volume, the damage both took. He was in Blades' face the whole time. Even when he was gassing out, they were both getting visibly tired almost throughout the whole, like, 2/3 of the fight on the back end. But he kept going. He never surrendered, no matter how much damage he took, no matter how gassed he was. And if he puts a couple hard combinations on Lewis is going to give up. So it's either Lewis catches Hokit in a big exchange and puts him right out, or the fight gets hairy, Hokit's pressuring him, and then Lewis is going to fold quickly. I think the obvious pick here is Hokit, if nothing else. Even if you don't care much about the technical striking, Hokit's speed, just sheer willpower and durability, and how determined he's going to be to win the fight. Hokit has to be the favorite, I think. How about you, Fanio? How do you see this matchup going?
I see pretty much like that. I think Hokit, I think some people overrate Hokit because he uses his athleticism very well. I think they overrate him technically, when what he brings to the table is like physical capabilities, right? He's very fast. As Ryan said, he's like a stocky heavyweight, which can be an advantage. We have seen the archetype like be successful in the past, especially with DC, Cain Velasquez, and Fyodor. I mean, he still has some looks, as Ryan said. He has some counter abilities. He likes to fight hands a lot, which can be useful against Derrick Lewis, actually, because Lewis wants to like swing big from the outside, and if you're controlling the hands from up close, you can do that a lot more difficult for him. Not quite sure if Hokit wants to wrestle in this one, but probably like Derrick Lewis probably cannot work the get-ups that he used to in his prime anymore. He's super old. He's not hitting as hard anymore. His chin is not as good. He still hits very, very hard, and he's still dynamic. So he always has a chance to win, Derrick Lewis. But I feel like the odds are correct here. Yeah, you gotta expect Hokit to just be faster and hit him hard, either early or when Derrick tires a little bit. I don't think they're going to fight at the same pace that Hokit did against Blades, because he's going to respect Derrick Lewis a lot more. But I feel like Hokit is smart enough, or if not smart, like at least like ballsy enough to just put the pressure either way on Derrick Lewis. He's going to be more careful than he was against Blades, but he's going to bring it. He's going to stay on his face, use his speed probably to make him swing, go in, put short combinations together, maybe like grab a corner tie and start like nailing him with alternating hooks and uppercuts, that kind of stuff. And Derrick Lewis is not there for the win if the fight gets tough anymore. I agree with that. You gotta go with Hokit. I think he's going to get Derrick Lewis out of there at the end of round one, honestly. So that brings us to my boy Dan Tom.
Man, I hope you're right, Fanio, because I bet the under on this fight, under 1.5 rounds, just because of what you guys said. Lewis used to have this both a comeback kid nature of him, to where not only did you want to not discount him at big odds, but he could come back late into fights, right? And shout out to Brian Stan, right? A lot of his commentary still holds up years later. One of them that doesn't anymore, though, is the fact that he had Derrick Lewis figured out early. He said, you think the game plan of a guy who calls himself the KO King is to grapple him, but if you look at his fights, those are the fighters that do the worst. The best were the fighters that strike with them, can keep like a jab on them and stuff, like Mark Hunt. And you would even see that until like the Cyril Gans and whatnot, right? Like that was true. And then you'd be like, oh, okay, well, Cormier is like not really a heavyweight. He's actually skilled, actually athletic, actually accoladed. So the fact that he was able to submit Derrick Lewis makes sense. Then you get Sergey Spivak. You start like getting all these names accused, just that weird fight where it looks like him and the jailman Jailton Almeida just bet the over on themselves, and cashed it. my guy RJ Clifford posted this thing with the stats, and I'm not a big stats fan, as you guys know, but and they don't always tell a story, but it kind of does in the fact that that narrative is no longer true. You look at the takedown rates, the L's in the column. Now all that stuff's actually matching. Like he can get grappled, and he can, to the previous analysis point, he can quit. So yeah, I'm gonna go with Josh Hokit here. We said Michael Chandler is explosive. Well, Josh Hokit is very athletic, and I know not any of you guys or anybody here at this panel, we actually give actual analysis, but most sports commentators, there's that like baked in racism in our language, where we never say we're going up to Compton. It's always down to Compton. We never say we're going down to the Hamptons. It's always up to the Hamptons, right? And whenever, we use words like athletic or explosive, a lot of commentators are doing it based on the darkness of the shading of their skin. The words actually lose meaning if we do that. Like the explosive is an actual thing. We don't just call every black fighter, for example, like Chandler's explosive. And Hokit, I watched this guy play basketball, which sounds really random, I know. And I know I'm not like a basketball analyst, so you shouldn't take my word too crazy. But the dude, I'm like, I get it, man, when people say he's an athlete. Like, this guy can pick up moves and pick up things pretty dang fast. So, yeah, give me Hokit here. Hopefully gets done around 1. To move it on, I want to pass it on to my guy Dan Albert here.
Yeah, so about Rare Hunter Bandit Keith from Yu-Gi-Oh! Cosplaying aside, I don't have much else to say upon Hokit himself or the dynamics of this. I do think he likes to frame with the jab a lot to save himself from the counters, but straight down the middle, if you keep pressing him, usually works. The thing is, that's not really like Lewis's game. Lewis basically has 3 punches specifically that pose danger: an uppercut, a right, or a left hook, and those are pretty easy to navigate if you keep touching him. He hates jabs, has god-awful cagecraft, and usually like hitting him to the body makes him always very, very upset. I do also suspect that if like Hokit likes to like jab or like use the straight into down the middle into the collar ties, into the clinch, he did show some good looks against Blades that might bode well, because Lewis is kind of a void there as well. So especially with how bad Lewis has been getting hit on the counters and longer exchanges recently, yeah, there's not much else I can really say that, unless he gets too reckless, this is Hokit's fight to lose.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with everybody here. It's obviously easy to pick Hokit, and Derrick Lewis has never been like a very great heavyweight. He's always made do. I always think it's funny that nowadays there's almost before every fight, there's a narrative about how he's taking it very seriously this time in his training. And then he shows up and just totally flops against Waldo Casas Acorsa or something like that. It's like he just is obviously never taking it that seriously. And he takes it probably as seriously as most heavyweights need to take the division heavyweight, because modern heavyweight is pretty bad. I like how Ryan Wagner pointed out that Josh Hokit, in this sense, is kind of like a throwback in terms of some of his approach and his size and things like that to heavyweights that when they were good. And I kind of thought of him as like, he's kind of a poor man's Kane right now, it's really easy to see that comparison, the wrestling background, the aggressiveness and things like that. Although it's clear that Kane had a lot more going for him technically, even when he showed up in the UFC with only a few fights under his professional MMA career. So Hokit doesn't seem to be like that, but he definitely, like everybody's pointed out, he's the athlete that he seems like. And it's a gigantic advantage in the heavyweight division, which is just totally devoid of most athletic talent, and generally anybody who's an athlete of any kind can end up in the top 5 of the UFC's heavyweight division just by essentially raising their hand. It's just kind of the case that we've seen now. Derrick Lewis, I think that, like RJ Clifford, and Dan Tom pointing out that, in the past, like he's generally survived a wrestling onslaught over time, and then gotten up to just knock people out late in fights. And the difference with Cormier is really that he just made it easy. You just need to shoot single legs on this guy. And that's really the case with most heavyweights, is that just, don't ever find yourself in a position where Derrick Lewis can put his weight on you. Just if you just lift up his leg and move him around a little bit, he's going to fall down, and you don't have to spend that much energy doing that. And I also think Hokit is pretty aggressive in transitions. And that can be a problem. Obviously, we're going to point out over and over again that he's vulnerable and he gets hit all the time. And his main defense is being fast, faster than people, and overwhelming them so that they can't throw. The thing, though, is that probably whether it's with, just shooting a single leg and then hitting him in transition, or just bum rushing him like he did Curtis Blades, whatever he decides to do, it's going to work. And I think Feño was pointing out, he might be a little bit more hesitant because Derrick Lewis is obviously a much bigger threat in terms of power. And this is, I haven't combed through all of his record, but this is probably the most powerful opponent that he's fought. And he is a small heavyweight. So, facing somebody who's, probably is up there for most knockouts in the UFC ever. He's probably close to having that record or something like that. It might be a little bit intimidating, but I think at this point with Hokit and everything that he's trying to do, like, he has to commit to the full thing and he has to really go after people. It would be probably make things worse for him if he was more tentative, even if he might run into a shot running forward. Just sitting around and being cautious or capital T technical, he doesn't have any skills to make that work. Maybe he could show up and just be like, oh, I can leg kick people now, and then Derrick Lewis just falls over or something like that. But if the worst thing that can happen if he stands on the outside is that, number one, we could get a slightly more boring fight than we want, but number two, he just gives Derrick Lewis the chance to do those funny jumping kicks that he like always does against everybody. I don't know why, but that's like the only kicks that he ever throws from range is like silly jumping switch kicks and stuff. It's funny. So we might see a little bit of that in the beginning before he gets bum rushed. But yeah, that's pretty much an easy fight for all of us to pick. Derrick Lewis, even in his prime, would probably struggle against Josh Hokit, and he's just like doesn't look like he has that much patience, and he's not that comeback kid like Dan Tom said anymore. So yeah, picking Hokit here, and that brings us to the top three fights. We've had a featherweight fight, we've had a lightweight fight, a middleweight, and a heavyweight, and now we move onto a bantamweight fight. Sean O'Malley at -435 versus Aiemann Zahabi at +330. This is, I think we all recognize as the UFC doing something that they don't usually do with any other fighter, which is trying to find a winnable matchup for Sean O'Malley in the top of the bantamweight division. He's getting a more selective matchmaking with his couple of fights here. They obviously want to get him back in a title fight relatively soon. So this is probably an eliminator for him. I'm not sure if they throw Aiemann Zahabi in for the title against Peter Yan if he wins, just because they might want to keep slow rolling him or not even slow, or just avoiding him altogether. But who knows? It seems like a title eliminator, although they have some other options if Aiemann Zahabi wins. So there's some stakes in this fight for sure, and the odds are showing O'Malley is a big favorite. But I'm kind of curious because I'm sure that all of us have recognized some of the limitations in O'Malley. So Feño, what do you think starting off here? You think that it's deservedly they give O'Malley this much of a favorite?
This seems super wide to me, honestly. Like, I'm gonna spoil here. I'm probably picking O'Malley, but Zahabi's live here, like +330 is crazy, especially when O'Malley is not super used to fighting guys that are like somewhat tall and have a jab. And we saw when Song Yadong decided to start jabbing O'Malley, he was like hating his life. Zahabi, unlike Song Yadong, is not going to forget to jab him. Very quickly, before I get into the analysis, I would love to see Aiemann Zahabi against Peter Yan, just because Peter Yan would absolutely destroy him. So just want to throw that one out there. But yeah, getting back to the actual fight, it comes down to O'Malley, obviously a lot mechanically sharper than Zahabi. Zahabi's pretty Yankee. But I think O'Malley doesn't like fighting guys with like boxing chops, and Zahabi, he has like a super ugly overhand right, but he knows how to jab. He understands the importance of filler shots. He has a bit of a lot of people have been comparing him to Strickland, but I think they do have one similarity, and it's that even though like moving around on the outside, the footwork looks kind of wonky. Even though Zahabi has a very different stance, though, Zahabi's very front foot heavy, while Strickland fights with more of his weight on the back with a light lead leg. But the thing that they have in common is that I feel like their footwork overall, when you consider like the directionality of the fight, is not very good. But positionally inside, they're actually pretty decent, I would say. Um, so I think those are like very good attributes to have against O'Malley, because O'Malley a lot of the time drives, like just flashing a guy, winning an angle, surprising with a huge strike. And I think Zahabi is going to be a lot harder to surprise with shots like that. So I think Zahabi with his jab, with his willingness to have a constant output out there, another thing that O'Malley doesn't like. He's going to be live in this fight. O'Malley has a lot of flash, but he can be kind of wonky when he's running out of ideas, and it doesn't take much to make Sean O'Malley run out of ideas. But O'Malley obviously still has some advantages in here. He's still taller and longer than Zahabi and fights more like it. Zahabi might have the jab, but O'Malley has a jab of his own, even if he doesn't use it that much. But he has a jab that actually pops people. He has, and the big advantage here for O'Malley, which comes from the other side, is that O'Malley has a nasty straight right hand, which I feel like Zahabi's not going to like. It's going to give a lot of trouble, and it's going to win him exchanges against the rainbow overhand, right, that Zahabi usually goes for. I feel like O'Malley is also like very primed to exploit the cross guard of Zahabi. Like, every TriStar guy has to try like 3 different guards, a long guard, a cross guard, like a bad shoulder roll. They gotta cycle through bad guards through their fights, and usually they all get hit doing that. But yeah, I mean, Zahabi is actually one fighter that trusts his ability to block and deflect shots a lot. And I think that doesn't pair very well against O'Malley. Against O'Malley, I think you are better off moving your head and your feet, just because he has like straight shots that are super quick. He hides them well behind feints, so he might surprise Zahabi here and there. And they have a big power differential here. It's not that Zahabi cannot pop. We've seen him get like big knockouts, especially was it against Mauricio Leng, where he landed that big right hand and got the knockout on the first round. And his jab, you gotta respect it. But O'Malley is going to have bigger moments, especially with his dynamic kicking, something that Zahabi is a bit of a void. Zahabi is actually decent at defending kicks, but I'm not sure if Zahabi is going to like catch the kicks of O'Malley and punish him for that. He might be able to defend some, but the aesthetics, the optics are still going to be bad for him. O'Malley is going to be super mobile. As I said, Zahabi's footwork is not great in open space. He knows how to stay on a guy. He knows how to pressure, but he's very lumbering. He's not very agile. And he's also like not super good at taking diagonal steps, which is something that you want to have when you're pressuring a guy that is quick and mobile. O'Malley's outside footwork is a bit of a mess, but he's very light-footed. He can move quickly, and he uses feints, misdirections very well to keep guys on the outside. Wrestling in this fight is probably not going to be existent. Zahabi has been mostly a dedicated striker. He's a solid grappler, but he's not going to implement that here. And O'Malley's not a void as a grappler, and his takedown defense has been mostly solid. He has been taken down by Merab, but Merab is a different beast from Aiemann Zahabi, obviously. I think this one comes Zahabi. I think the dynamic is going to be Zahabi pressuring here, looking to bother O'Malley with his jab, probably trying to find some kicks or some big right hands when he's trying to circle. And O'Malley is going to be feinting on the outside, looking for his spots to explode with big kicks, big punches. But one very good quality that O'Malley has, and I think that is going to allow him to pull away here, is that when he finds success, he's one of the few fighters in MMA that attacks again instead of like just resetting constantly and not taking a hold of the momentum. O'Malley is actually pretty decent at grabbing the momentum of fight. So if he hits you hard a few times, he's going to up the aggressiveness immediately. He's very long, he's very quick, and he knows how to maintain his own range, even against guys that are tall and have a jab. Even if he's going to hate that, O'Malley is going to keep moving, maintain a decent distance, and just spot shot with a lot more power and dynamism than Zahabi is going to offer. But honestly, I do see avenues for Zahabi. As I said, he knows how to pressure. He might like some tools, but we've seen like O'Malley like lose focus of a fight and fall apart a bit. And I feel like if Zahabi manages to get a close round in rounds 1 or 2, where you can make an argument for him, and then he can maybe like take over on 3, I think he can win a split. But if I have to pick, I gotta go with Sean O'Malley. But I insist these odds are super long. What do you think then, Tom?
I think that a fight between Peter Yan and Aiemann Zahabi would look like a fight like between Peter Yan and that Korean guy, but much more funnier, Fenyo, for whatever that's worth to feed that. But no, as far as the fight goes, I was similar. Spoiler alert: I'm probably picking O'Malley here, but I do feel like Zahabi is one of the live dogs, which means, you know, like from a betting perspective, for example, even if I was picking O'Malley, bets are different. I wouldn't like be rushing to bet on him, much less at this price, and especially because like I texted someone, I'm like, O'Malley's also injury prone and a quick turnaround. But I looked, it feels like that Song Yadong fight wasn't as long. I don't know if you guys feel that way, but it was like 6 months ago. And maybe that's because if you look at it, at least up until like O'Malley's title run and since, he averages like 7 to 8 months between fights. The dude's like always like injured, dealing with stuff. You know, he's one of my canaries in the coal mine when I like talk about guys like him. Brandon Royval at a division below him, or Andre Uhl at a division above him, or we want to go back further and even up further, Corey Hill back in the day snapping his shin at 155. The common correlation there, folks, is these are long, lanky guys that continue to cut a lot of weight into their 30s, and that is when the injuries really start piling up. O'Malley already had them piling up in his 20s back when he was fighting guys like Andre Sukum and the like, right, with his foot almost falling off. So like that reason alone, that nothing to do with any O'Malley hate, but like that reason alone, like fluky stuff's always open, right? Not that Zahabi is live just for that reason. A lot of things Fenyo said he can pop. I was looking at something on leg kicks though, and it was funny, like, so because I got to go back and refresh some of the tape, but from what I remember, Zahabi's not a big leg kicker. And I went to look at the stats, which again, I hate stats, and you need to be careful looking at stats, especially when it comes to leg kicks. Everyone on this panel knows that they don't count check leg kicks. So, like, if you're looking for any kind of like this, the MMA stats are useless for leg kicks for that. But what they are useful for is like, okay, well, how much can they at least give me a generality, like how much a guy is throwing? You know, I don't expect the numbers to be completely accurate because they aren't, but can it give me that generality? And the funny thing is, if you go to Zahabi's record, every fight on his UFC fight, except for his very first fight against Reginaldo Vieira, who was like your classic jiu-jitsu brawler, he is leg kicking all the guys you think he wouldn't want to leg kick because of the looming takedown threats and on-paper advantages. And against the dedicated strikers, he's like literally, you're lucky if he can clear 10 attempts. You know, so I don't like that trend against O'Malley, but I got to imagine, say what you will about you know, Faraz and whatnot, those guys pride themselves on their preparation and game planning and trying to build fighters out for that. And we have to keep in mind that it was, even though this is a classic, you know, let's put O'Malley over, and I absolutely agree that's what the UFC is doing as far as like what Miguel was laying out. Let's not forget that Aiemann also called for this fight, and he has something in mind and stuff. So yeah, I'll be rooting for Aiemann, who owes me a proper succulent Chinese meal. But yeah, as far as picking him goes, yeah, probably gonna pick O'Malley and pass. Last thing though, before I pass it on to my guy Dan Albert, I've been posting like UFC Freedom vibes, and I'm showing that It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia episode, which I want to rewatch. I don't know if you guys have ever watched that show, And if you haven't, please go watch the pro wrestling one, because I feel like that's what I'm getting. UFC Freedom 255 is like the Birds of Prey. It's like Chandler.
100%. Yeah.
It's Chandler, Nickal, right? And who would be the third in this? It would probably be a Hokit, of course, right? And then like for Zahabi, like they showed him in the fight kit. Now I didn't want to tweet this because it's probably going to come off racist, and maybe it'll come off racist. I say it now, but they made in the It's All a Sunny episode, they make one of their friends dress up as a terrorist to face them, and they make him go brown face, and they have him like in the it's terribly racist, right? Like it's very mid-aughts America in that sense. And could you imagine Zahabi shows up and he was actually being a good sport? He's like, I'll wear the colors with pride as a Canadian, which was wild to hear him say that, right? But could you imagine he's like, hey, where's my suit? Like, Aiemann, we actually got something different we'd like you to wear. Trump requested, come this way. Are they gonna pull that? Like, oh my God. I don't know. I had to throw that out there to you guys. But Dan Howard, feel free to fucking steer us back in the right direction.
Of course, other Dan. All right. So O'Malley's whole deal is that in context of the top bantamweights, he makes up for a lot of his well-roundedness with a lot of his dangerous attributes and like intangibles. Mainly with the power, speed, and just his particularly like potent feint game, which I would describe as particularly jittery, and it's the kind that can even throw very defensive fighters like Jan off. He has a good sense of rhythm, distance, and setups, and where he's at his most dangerous is when he can craft the responses behind the feints, or if you follow him, especially if he gets that jab going, he can touch you on top of it in neutral space, especially. In other words, O'Malley's at his best when he's like able to press you or when you're standing in front of him in neutral. The issue with O'Malley is that he kind of has these very restrictive lanes for where he can be potent. And so there's a difference between someone kind of charging in on him with kind of a shifting, like fast committed entry, like a Sterling did, versus somebody who constantly works for inches and keeps touching at a distance, who can sort of play chicken with him the way Merab sort of did. Until you can put him in kind of the positions where you want, because his backwards like spatial management ain't the best unless you're just going to follow him like Cheeto did. So the thing is with O'Malley, I'd argue a lot of opponents probably give him sort of too much respect once they press him and get work done, but you still have to respect him to extents though. Where Zahabi's interesting is that, like, Fenya already brought up the cross-armed guard. It's not a great one. But he makes up for an enormous amount of, like, technical and mechanical weaknesses with a lot of grit and willingness to be constantly exploitive with things that work, such as constantly kicking Cheeto, constantly touching with the jab, etc. And so, in theory, the way to look at this fight is O'Malley should quickly be able to cause overreactions on Zahabi's part because his defensive and technical woes are just naturally kind of like responsive to that kind of jitterness anyways. And his defense is very worrisome, especially against the fence versus body shots. I can see a world where he can, with just pure aggressiveness and activity, kind of psycho O'Malley out a bit with just constantly touching him with kicks and presence, kind of like Song Yadong did. The problem is that he sort of lacks Song's durability, though, for the counters. So it's hard to not see him getting hit at least once on the counter due to those linear kind of steps in. So my feeling is Zahabi is a dog, and I think he can make this kind of an uglier fight for O'Malley than many of the odds suggest, like the others have said, though O'Malley should be the favorite for a reason. And I think unlike an Aldo who gassed out or Cheeto who just struggles to press these days once he has the other guy hurt, I think if O'Malley gets him hurt, or he can kind of put it on him a lot worse than the others did. So O'Malley should be the favorite, but Zahabi I'd say is a dog, and it would be the funniest win.
Yeah, I agree on Zahabi being like a live dog here. Mostly, and that comes from the weirdness with O'Malley. And I think if Zahabi wins, it'll probably be like another sort of close split decision where you kind of have to judge the big moments that O'Malley will likely have versus Zahabi perhaps landing some more volume or being a little bit more consistent of an operator. Although, like Fenyo said, O'Malley is definitely somebody that wants to snowball his offense. Now, he's a fighter that I actually wrote extensively about, but this was 4 years ago now when we were writing for the fight site. And that was, before I think even his fight with Peter Yan, and I tried to give him a fair appraisal. And I think that he has changed a little bit since then, but fundamentally, like you just said there, Dan Albert, he is a fighter that needs to get his feints going. It needs to get reactions to really start that snowballing offense for it to work at all. And has some tools to sort of pick away at somebody from the outside. Like he has some a pretty diverse kicking game, and he has his jab, like you guys mentioned. He's particularly good against opponents that he can front kick, but really he struggles to keep that consistently against opponents who don't want to just let him do that. And I think Zahabi, the live doggedness of him is probably that what we've seen in his recent fights against Cheeto and against Jose Aldo is that he will just get after people if that is the right thing to do strategically. It does seem like he sort of has to get himself up to do that in terms of like get motivated or get his corner yelling at him enough. He does sort of have that Strickland thing where he does like to just sort of walk around in a narrow stance from the outside and look to jab people. But when he needs to, especially after he gets hurt, he will get after people. And that is something that can work against O'Malley because like Fenyo said, that his footwork is technically not the best in a lot of circumstances, but he gets a lot done by just being fast and sort of juking people left and right when they get him up against the cage. And that might just be enough to circumnavigate Zahabi here. But I think that some of the things that Zahabi brings is that he's like that awkward cross arm guard that like sort of flashing Philly shell and all this stuff that you guys have pointed out does make him a little bit harder to hit. But unfortunately, it's mostly just with hooks and looping shots that he is good at defending. I think those straight shots he's still pretty vulnerable to. He's not like Strickland and a very great jab catcher, if I remember right. And even if he is, I think the speed differential here and the length, more importantly, could probably make that difficult for him. And that probably means that it's going to be hard for him if O'Malley does commit to getting his jab going. Then Zahabi will have a tough time stopping the snowball from rolling. Because once O'Malley gets his jab going, then he can start feigning it and setting up his other offense. And so if Zahabi wants to really nip O'Malley's offense in the bud, he's going to have to win the jab battle, which he does have a good jab. And that could dissuade O'Malley enough if he's willing to trade jabs with him, if he's willing to pressure him and be awkward and really keep the volume up. I can see an avenue here where he could make it just uncomfortable for O'Malley enough that we get sort of the worst version of O'Malley where he doesn't really ever reach his comfort zone and then loses confidence, because he really is, the snowballing of his offense really comes from him wanting to style on people. He has like his whole game really of like, if you follow him like I did when I had to write that article, if you follow him from the beginning of his career up until his time to the UFC, it's like everything about him as a personality and as a fighter is built to like succeed in an era of like viral clips on social media. Like he just wants to like create a viral moment and do something cool. And he just hasn't that's part of he kind of Mauricio Hoofy is kind of like this as well, where it's like they kind of end up not doing as much as they want to sometimes because they can just be waiting to get something cool to set up. But what we've seen is in fights where it's dangerous and people bring it to him, like in his fight with Peter Yan, then he can respond in kind, as long as it's not, Merab who's just going to wrestle him. And I don't think that's really an option here for Zahabi. So in agreement with everybody else, I think that there's something there to be wary about with Zahabi, but you just see the athletic differences, you see the potency differences, and you see just how kind of hittable Zahabi is by straight shots. Like he got dropped with a huge straight right from Aldo because he's doing that sort of weird thing where he's like Fenyo pointed out, he can be positionally good inside like Strickland, but that sort of narrow stance walking around means he's constantly squaring himself up. It's not as bad as when somebody who has a more like wide bladed stance will square themselves up, and they like because he's not ever really committing his weight hard one way or the other, which kind of mitigates the danger of narrow stance, but he still like can be timed and dropped. And that's probably, if O'Malley can pick up on him and get feints going and get his jab going, that's probably what he'll do. But Zahabi's tough enough that I think that this does end up going all 3 rounds. And like I said, if there's a way for Zahabi to win, it's probably from winning on volume over moments. Although I still think O'Malley's gonna have enough big moments to win at least 2 out of the 3 rounds here. So a bit longer winded for me here, just because O'Malley's somebody that I've written a lot about in the past. But I'm wondering, Ryan Wagner, if you have any thoughts about whether or not TriStar is going to finally breed another new George St. Pierre.
Yeah, I agree with you guys that the odds are a bit wide. I certainly wouldn't play O'Malley at these odds, but I think the matchup is stylistically maybe a bit worse for Zahabi than you guys do. Fenyo did a really good job of summing up the way I see Zahabi as a fighter, where he's like kind of that inching pressure, has a good lead hand, and kind of loopy punches off everything else. And a lot of you guys have pointed out that he might be able to trouble O'Malley with his jab, especially because he's so consistent with it. He always comes forward behind the jab. He's always feinting it and pumping it out. I think that's going to be actually a downside for Zahabi. I think that's kind of a trap, where instead of his jab working well, it will kind of lock him into approaching O'Malley the wrong way, and then not really give O'Malley a reason to bother jabbing with him at all. For someone like O'Malley to approach him at long range, I think you want someone like Peter Yan, who can set up diverse entries off a bunch of different strikes, where he can get his rear hand going. He can make you think he's going to throw the rear hand, then shift forward. He can feint the lead hand and then suddenly like jump forward. He'll enter off kicks. There's a lot of different things he can do to distract you and then close a lot of distance. And when you have O'Malley against the cage, I think the kind of thing you want there is to be like a Chad Mendez type. Bend your knees, get underneath his punches, make him swing at your head and sail over the top of it so you can hit him with tight, fast overhands while he's standing upright. And Zahabi is kind of the direct opposite of both those things at both those ranges. On the outside, he's going to be approaching slowly, methodically, working his way up behind his jab. And these kind of fights, when somebody that relies on their jab to close distance so much fights somebody that has no reason to stand in jabbing range at all, often their jab ends up acting as a tip-off for everything they want to do. So O'Malley will be standing an extra step away from him. So if he wants to hit O'Malley, if O'Malley's standing still, he'll need to throw a jab that misses and then step forward and throw another jab. The first jab he throws, O'Malley's going to see that and just back up. And since O'Malley has the longer weapons, he has a really long straight punch that he can feint his way into without having to kind of get his lead hand going with active jabs. He has longer range kicks. So I think that Zahabi is going to have a lot of trouble approaching him, because whenever he jabs and O'Malley just backs up, then it's going to neutralize a lot of what he does at range. And then if he's able to work his way closer and get him onto the cage, like Fenyo mentioned, a lot of his other work is very loopy. There's not a lot of connection between his hips and his punches. He doesn't really get underneath shots to counter very well. He throws like long looping hooks with those kind of like horizontal palm hooks that kind of land with the side of his fist. And I don't think those are great for someone like O'Malley. O'Malley will be able to like duck underneath and get out, or bait him into something and slide out the other way. So I don't see a really good, consistent way Zahabi has to put hands on him. I think he'd be very smart to approach this, to approach closing distance in some other way, like step in behind kicks, or just throw his rear hand first and kind of wade forward a little bit more often than he does. But that's not what he tends to do. And I think that his normal approach of jabbing in is going to get him in a lot of trouble. And I don't think he's going to be able to capitalize when he does get those opportunities to work inside with O'Malley on the cage. So I'm gonna favor O'Malley pretty confidently, but like you guys said, O'Malley is like a minus 435 favorite, and that does seem a little wide to me. I wouldn't totally trust him at those odds, but I think it's a tough fight for Zahabi.
Yeah, so we're all unanimous there in picking Sean O'Malley, although recognizing the difficulty to some extent that Zahabi could place. But although Ryan there giving a good case that to be a little bit more confident in O'Malley than the rest of us, which I'm totally on board with as well. So let's move on to the next one. We're back up to heavyweight, but this time Alex Pereira is shedding his light heavyweight championship to move up in an interim title fight with Cyril Gane, who poked the shit out of the eyes of the existing reigning champion. And so now we get this kind of silly, crazy, but even odds interim title fight between Alex Pereira, who's, like I said, at a minus 110, and Cyril Gane also minus 110. So even odds here. It's an interesting one. I think probably the best shot, judging by the odds, for us to have some disagreement here. Maybe we'll get some debate as we'll go down through the members here. But let's start us off with Dan Tom. I know that you have some thoughts on the southpaw dynamics here for sure, right? Cyril Gane most likely to come out and fight a lot in southpaw here. And how do you think that plays against Alex Pereira?
Yeah, I agree. Cyril Gane is probably a southpaw primary stance switcher. You could call him that because he primarily fights out of southpaw, but switches stance, and he'll be encouraged to because of the leg kicks, which is something that's going to be on the table for Poatan. He's a good leg kicker. Cyril Gane, a dynamic and diverse kicker, but as far as kicking defense goes, not the greatest. Poatan can still kick in that open stance. Poatan, of course, 3-1 against UFC level lefties. He split 2 fights there with Magomed Ankalaev, Dagestani Stipe Miocic, aka, and then he also beat Jamal Hill, and as well as Khalil Roundtree. Of course, he fought another switcher, Bruno Silva, who is the bane of my existence for southpaw stats because he lists himself as a southpaw, but he primarily fights orthodox except for like every full moon, and then he'll like randomly fight a lot of southpaw, and he did to Poatan Pereira, and they both had some highlighted clips that I pulled from that. But it's tough. I don't think Poatan's really fought a guy like this in the UFC. You know, some people were thinking maybe John Jones might be his first. Of course, you know, if you have to reverse samples, Gane is kind of, you know, that's kind of the closest Gane has gotten to fighting himself, at least in the feet, you know, with a lot of those looks, the oblique kicks and whatnot, and the stance switches and the fleet of foot movement. And that's going to be a big question. I was interviewing Eric Nickal a couple weeks ago, and he was saying that Francis Ngannou is leaning toward Ciryl in this fight because of the movement. And it makes sense. I mean, it was a big ask. I mean, granted, Ngannou technically did it on one good knee, but it was still a big ask on paper, no matter how you play that fight out with Cyril Gane. And even with all the correct tactics of, you know, as Eric Nickal likes to say, loading or reloading. I've heard people also referencing as levering punches, like in boxing, where you, instead of going left, right, you go left, or right, especially if you're corralling, and that's within the context we're talking. So, you know, it remains to be seen if Poatan's going to have, you know, good tactics that way. I know you guys are very similar to me with the analyst mindset, as far as hard to bet on things that you haven't seen before, right? As well. So, not that Poatan can't fight smart. He just kind of always fights like Poatan, right? And he's got his own hard wiring of a system. And I like that system better when he's getting, you know, jabs from orthodox thrown at him and leg kicks that he can tag from orthodox. I just feel he's a little bit more effective there. Even in kickboxing, I can't recall him really facing a fighter like this. So yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting to me because, on the other hand, Gane, who has never been the biggest fan of, obviously I picked Volkov to beat him the first time, and he surprised me. You know, just that lead-handed jab and maybe that size parity and athleticism, superior speed and athleticism throughout Volkov. Volkov even kind of injured and had a better idea what he wanted to do. Things that I don't see Poatan doing, like getting after that takedown real early he gets on Ciryl in the rematch in round 1. And then, maybe it's a style thing. Maybe it's a bad approach thing from Aspinall, who can maybe, but did, at least in that fight, get a bit tunnel vision. Didn't mix in as much takedowns as I thought. Kind of just got locked in on track to one thing he was doing. I don't want to make too much of that fight, but I do also want to give Gane credit there. And yeah, guys, basically I say all that to say is that a pick isn't quite locked in yet, but this actually might be the first time I've ever picked against Poatan, which is not crazy because he hasn't had the craziest sample size. But yeah, I even picked him that first time again when he first beat Izzy, which maybe is the closest parallel. And that fight I'll bring up before I pass on is because there was a lot of stupid grappling in that fight, and I think there's going to be a lot of stupid grappling in this fight. Obviously, the weakness you think for Gane would be grappling. I was actually picking Aspinall to beat him by sub because Aspinall, I figured, I'm like, well, he's bound to fight smart one time, right? And like go for a takedown. This will be the fight. And Gane really likes underhook get-ups, which was something that like Aspinall will just Kimura you for. I don't think he's got to worry about that here with Poatan, and something that he's done as of late. He did it in that Alexander Volkov fight. And maybe it wasn't the worst of moves if he was able to hold position and not drop back for stupid leg locks, but he's been going to takedowns more. Now, one of the things that's always worried me in fights with Gane is that he has a habit to reset into the clinch. So when he does get himself too over far of the feet on his left cross, or he is extending the combinations a little more too much than he likes, his safety zone, like a lot of guys, is they clutch and fall into the clinch. And so it's like, oh no, I meant to be off balance and fall forward. I wanted to get here. And it's just like, well, why the hell would you want to be there against this guy, Cyril Gane, right? So that's always been my canary in a coal mine for his style that could get him into trouble. However, this fight, it might not, because he's not just going and hanging out Muay Thai style or MMA Muay Thai style in the clinch. He's actually like going for takedowns, chaining off and shucking off into doubles and like doing different things like that. And he did the not so subtle teasing that he might do that, which is kind of obvious that he might. And yeah, I think both guys are much better grapplers than they've been stereotyped against. That's been the clear pathway to beat both these guys. But I don't know if they're better enough grapplers to like not look silly, where it's going to be, I think it's going to be a silly fight if we start getting a lot of takedowns. So I actually think Cyril Gane, who opened it a bigger favorite, like he's much more bettable now. If you want to bet him straight up, I think total takedowns, like betting that he'll get over one takedown, which will probably be set at maybe over 1.5. I think that's really live for the Cyril Gane side. I think win or lose, he's going to get some takedowns in this fight. And I actually like this fight to go over more than I like picking a side. So I'm curious if you guys want to touch on this with your breakdowns, if you see this fight going long or short, regardless if you have a pick, if at least for my curiosity, if not the audience's. So I'm going to hand it over to my guy, Dan Albert, after that. But yeah, I might actually pick against Poatan. We'll see.
Yeah, this fight's very strange. Even ignoring the whole crossweight issue, I think a lot of how these guys' strengths and weaknesses kind of play into one another here, but I'll kind of get to that. So Pereira has always been interesting to me because I think he's most comfortable when he can work behind his kicks or jab, and especially with the right feint to left hook setups. I think he's very much kind of a sniper by nature who likes to subtly draw guys in to those traps. Yet paradoxically, he's not very much somebody who enjoys extensive pocket fighting or countering and touching the opponent unless he can pivot on them. So that's often why, you should be pressing him in certain ways. If you press too hard, you'll get pivot countered, and that usually is why Jiri got killed so easily in that rematch. But the thing about Pereira is that he's very, I think, sometimes inconsistent about jabbing. And I've never really understood what it is. I think it might depend upon opponents that are passive or offer resistance. Maybe sometimes it's preoccupying him with in the hand fight that he likes to employ for pairing and whatnot. But on that subject, I do think, especially in an open stance matchup like this, opponents who do employ throwaways and step in on him, like his main go-to is to pull and try to parry down the middle, and guys who touch him with that to keep him pressed back can often find success, even laterally behind kicks as well. The thing that makes this very, very strange is I'm not 100% sure Gane is naturally inclined to press, but I think he showed signs of it
I'll get to that though. Gane's main thing is he outfights. I've seen like some like, and I was guilty of it too, once kind of calling him a bit of a Jackson Wink ink striker in like form, and some of that is true, but it's not perfectly fair. It's mainly the jab low kick game, and his mobility does kind of keep people on edge, specifically at heavyweight where most guys aren't going to have that. But even though he's very mobile, that doesn't necessarily mean his footwork's great. So that's often why like he especially gets punished with kicks on switches and crossing in his stance, though I'm not sure I favor Pereira as much in like an open stance matchup as a kicker. I do like Dan's point about him like punching into the clinch, because I do think that's going to be a very interesting zone for both guys. And Fenyo and I were talking about this in our direct messages the other day, but yeah, it's kind of an X factor. Pereira kind of likes the overhook to turn, though I do like a lot of looks Gane's kind of shown behind grips and manipulating like where his head is, posting into your chest for some uppercut setups. Gane does, however, like to frame out sometimes off of his jab, and this has gotten him in trouble against like Tuivasa and whatnot. I do think like him kind of punching into some entries might actually help him here if he can press. And I specifically do like the jab dipping tactics that he showed against Ngannou and Ospinall for the counters. As far as like creating step-in opportunities on Pereira. But this is a very weird fight for me, because in some ways it feels like it depends upon who can step forward and who's going to employ a better counter kind of game against each other. And I'm not really sure how that's going to play out until we see it, even ignoring the size kind of thing, because I can see Pereira like attacking the resets, and I can see Gane like being comfortable enough to like step in and keep kind of disorienting him a little bit with some touches. I feel like in theory the matchup might favor Pereira, because Gane's going to concede a back foot game that I'm not sure is layered enough to deal with some of Pereira's threats, but I also don't know if Pereira is that deep against like the open stance matchup here for it to be a big deal against like a natural heavyweight like Gane. So it's a very strange fight. Gane can be hot and cold, old, but it's hard to call here. I think Gane's a very live dog, and I might side with him a little bit more just on a hunch. I would not be surprised either way. And this could go long and be kind of boring potentially.
Yeah, I see that too. I see the weirdness and the struggle to even imagine how this fight plays out. And a lot of that comes down to the ambiguity about the directionality that you're talking about there, Dan. It's just hard to get a sense for how they will sort of match up there and how they will approach it. Well, we do have like a general idea that Gane is more of a back foot fighter, and that Pereira has more of a flexibility in how he approaches either pressuring or fighting off the back foot. I just don't know what they're going to do. My sense is that they will both be a bit cautious and will consent to sort of a longer range kickboxing fight, trading kicks, trying to be setting up their entries. And, you know, I don't think Pereira's just going to go out there like he did against Ankalaev in the rematch and just storm out the gate, pressure him to the fence and try and attack him. But it is kind of like, well, if he did that, could it just work? Like, could it just work against Cyril Gane, who, you know, his, like you mentioned, he's a good mover in terms of speed, but not in terms of his actual footwork. And so that means, yeah, he is vulnerable. But at the same time, it's like he's also just really big and might just take Pereira down, like like Dan Dom was mentioned. And so you know, what happens when they get in the clinch? And there's a lot of unknowns. That's why it's an even fight. It's really hard to understand these types of fights when, first of all, they're just as opponents, like you were saying, Dan Albert, apart from the weight issue, they represent some uniqueness for each other. And it's like weird when you say, like, is the closest parallel to Cyril Gane for Pereira like Israel Adesanya? I don't know. That's like a very, very different matchup in a lot of ways, but probably. And then, but it just changes very drastically when you're like guy with basically the same height as Israel Adesanya, but like 100 pounds heavier or something like that, because Adesanya is not a very robust individual. So it's just very hard to picture how this fight goes. I do think some attributes that, as we're watching in the early rounds, as we start seeing the dynamics play out, how the jab plays out will be huge. Pereira has a very good jab, and Gane is quite quick with his. That's really what he was busting up Aspinall with early on. And Pereira relies on his long guard and his range a lot for defense, and can be vulnerable back, like getting back straight up. And Gane certainly has the size and the speed to do that to him. But also there's just the difference in danger here in terms of Pereira is just a much bigger one shot, one kill threat, obviously, but then also in the pocket. Like if you see the way that Gane tries to unload on somebody in the pocket, it's horrendous. Like all of his punching mechanics go out the window, and he's like throwing hammer fist on their back or something like that. It's crazy. And it's like, I can imagine in some sense that he catches Pereira with a jab while Pereira's trying to throw a low kick, and it stumbles Pereira back, and then Gane runs after him to try and finish him and just gets caught with a left hook, sort of like what happened to Yuri Prohaska. Like I can imagine things like that, just because there's just weirdness in both of these guys. And they're both, like I said, Pereira can choose to fight different ways, and Gane just, he sort of was locked in against Tom Aspinall, but that's probably because he knew Tom Aspinall was like a serious threat in the first round and was going to come after him. And so he was very locked in early, was jabbing and moving and breaking the clinch and digging his fingers into his skull. But it's like he at the very least, he was like very ready to fight early. And you watch the fight with Volkov, the fight just before that in Gane's career, and it's like totally different. He's very listless, very put off and uncomfortable against Volkov's like lumbering punch kick combinations. And you see Volkov like getting a lot done with his kicks, even in open stance, and despite being, like glacially slow, but he's just kind of awkwardly picking at him. And really Gane has to sort of try and essentially steal a win there with some mostly empty top control, even though he ends up on the bottom in the third round, Gane does. And it's just such a bad look for Gane in that fight. So that's why a lot of people were picking Aspinall with some confidence against Gane, because of how bad Gane looked in that fight. But it's just, he looked very different in the fight with Aspinall, and he could be really switched on here as well. And that just makes it a very hard fight to predict. Now, I think overall, if I had to say who is a more reliable fighter, it's definitely Pereira. But the weight difference just matters a ton, and the grappling difference here in terms of that. While I agree with Dan Tom that we could get some really ugly, messy grappling, I think given the size and the willingness for Gane to engage with it proactively means that he'll probably be getting the better of it. I don't know if it'll be causing damage, but it could unfortunately do the thing that it's not supposed to do, which is steal rounds. And so that makes it a little bit of a pretty major X factor. But I think I'm just gonna go with Pereira here, just because I like him better mechanically. I think that in his ability to compete at kicking range, even in open stance where it's not as good for him, he does have good switch kicks and things like that. He still can attack the lead leg against southpaws like he's done against some southpaw opponents, although probably not ones as big and fast. But still, I think the kicking game being there, and I think just mostly it's that left hook too. It's good against southpaws, and it's good against somebody who is a willing mover, but not a great technical mover. And I can really see Pereira, especially if he gets on the front foot at all, catching Gane, trying to circle out with a left hook. Actually, there's a few times that Volkov did that. He just has absolutely no power in his left hook, so it just kind of slapped Gane in the face. But if Pereira's power transfers up here, which is kind of a big if, but maybe not, because Pereira is one of the hardest punchers ever, you should imagine that he can maybe hit at least as hard as Tai Tuivasa. So I see some specific tactical things there while just feeling that he's a more consistent fighter. But I'm wondering, Ryan, if you have any like better idea about how this fight is gonna go, or are you like the Dans and I, and that we're just kind of like scratching our heads?
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same page as you there. I like Gane a little bit less on the feet, maybe. The best way to neutralize Pereira and strip him of his potency, I think, is to keep in his face, to keep him on the back foot, and to keep an active threat and an active presence in front of him. Ankalaev played that really well in the first fight, and he wasn't just moving forward, and Pereira would automatically move back. He stood his ground when Pereira tried to take ground. He was hitting with counters. He would feint Pereira back and throw shifting combinations to fill the space up. He wasn't moving when Pereira wanted him to move, and Gane is just totally unable to do that. I agree that a big part of this fight will be who's moving forward and the directionality where the fight's taking place in the octagon. And I think that it is likely Pereira will spend quite a lot of time in the fight, fighting off the back foot, letting Gane come forward, and kind of being low volume. But he can move forward whenever he wants, and Gane can't do anything about that. I think the only tool Gane really has to intercept him is his flicking jab. And expecting Gane to get Pereira really uncomfortable on the feet and control the fight, to me, is, if I see that happening, then it's by Gane picking him apart without ever getting out of first gear. And I don't think that's likely. I think there is a lot of things Gane does that can trouble Pereira. That long in and out flicking jab is an easier way to approach him without making yourself vulnerable than a lot of weapons most of his other opponents have. He has like the long linear kicks that can work well against Pereira too. One of the more effective strikes for Ankalaev in his first fight with Pereira was a teep off the rear leg that he would use to push Pereira back. And it also made Pereira think twice about kicking. So that's going to be there for Gane. He has that like long, low line side kicks or oblique kicks that he can probably throw from outside Pereira's range. But ultimately, to me, it comes down to, I think that Pereira is going to be able to find ways around what Gane does, because there's not a whole lot of it. And I don't think he's going to be able to control the entire fight with just that in and out jab and his kicks. And when he has to get out of first gear and the fight gets a little bit messier, Gane is really bad at anything that entails. His left hand is horrible. He can't throw it without exposing himself to serious danger. If you look at the Jamal Hill finish, that was, the ref like broke them up, and then Pereira waves him off. He stalks towards Hill. Hill throws his left hand and he just slips outside it and vaporizes him with a left hook. And Gane's left hand is a lot worse than that. He doesn't set it up well. His mechanics are terrible. He loses his feet every time he throws it, and half the time he tumbles over himself. His weight drifts forward of his feet and he almost falls down. Dan Tom made a good point that could be a useful entry to the clinch for him. But whenever he's throwing it, if he's not immediately closing distance and getting chest to chest, he's in serious danger. And again, there's not really any good, reliable intercepting tool for him. If Pereira decides he wants off the cage or if he wants to pressure, there's not a whole lot Gane can do about that. Whereas the opposite way around, Pereira has a lot more he can do about that. So yeah, I don't think that Gane is going to be able to win it on the feet unless he's perfect. And Gane is never perfect. The grappling and the clinch is obviously an X factor that I don't really know how to weigh. Neither of them are good wrestlers. Pereira is fine defending upper body in the clinch enough, and Gane is likely not going to do much there unless he can squish him to the cage with an underhook. Maybe he'll get an outside trip. But of course, the weight. Gane is big. His in and out flicking jab does mean that reactive shots are going to be there a lot if he can draw out a big swing. Whether he can time that well enough, I don't know. But if he can get in on a clean shot, then Pereira is probably not going to have much to offer there. He doesn't really have any chain wrestling defense. If he can't get his hips into the takedown and stop your momentum right away, he's probably going down. And then once he's on the ground, I don't know that Pereira is going to do a great job of getting back up. So I think that with Gane's skill set, I think there is a game he could play that could probably reliably beat Pereira, but I just don't trust Gane at all to play that. He's not safe on the feet. I think he's just less crafty in general. He's going to be doing a worse job of finding openings and punishing them and creating openings than Pereira is. And I don't trust him to wrestle to a win. So I'm going to pick Pereira. Not super confident in him. The wrestling for Gane is a threat, but I don't like Gane to stay safe for 25 minutes. I think that Pereira likely either knocks him out or hurts him reliably enough that a win for Gane is a bit too much for him. Benio, how do you see this fight going?
This one is very weird. Obviously, we have Pereira moving 2 weight classes up from what he originally came up to the UFC. And despite that, I still think that he's probably going to be like immediately one of the biggest guys around at heavyweight, because Pereira seems to have a supernatural ability to put on mass. He's like one of the biggest light heavyweights immediately, and we know that a lot of light heavyweights are bigger than the heavyweights, but we'll see in what kind of shape he shows up, because he was actually fat for that stare down like a month ago or so. So that will be interesting to see. I'm gonna play devil's advocate a little bit here for Gane, even though I agree with Ryan that Pereira does possesses a consistency and danger and a capability to adapt that is very dangerous for Gane. Gane does bring some interesting attributes. Dave or Ryan just mentioned the long side kicks that could be interesting, especially with how mobile and how big Ciryl Gane is. It's not like you can just ignore those side kicks. Another thing is that Gane, despite being this kind of bouncy guy, he's actually very decent at defending kicks. Some people are expecting Pereira to just kick his legs apart, but especially if he brings with the game plan of defending leg kicks, I can see him being successful at hanging around range and just dealing with the leg kicks. Ciryl Gane is one of the few heavyweights in mixed martial arts that can actually deal with kicks. If you go back and watch his first fight with Volkov, pretty much a rangy fight that Volkov wins every time against everyone else. And Gane just had a field day, just shaking kicks, counter kicking, just spot shotting a way longer guy. So that's interesting, right? As Miguel mentioned, Gane has a very quick jab, and he has some feints. He has some setups to it. He has good in and out movement. Pereira's jab is also not super nuanced. It's very stiff, and it plays better to the rest of his game than Gane's. But at long range, it's a very interesting jab battle, and I feel like Gane might have a few advantages just because of the fencing style. I'm not quite sure Pereira likes that a lot, that fencing style, but he has tools to deal with it. As you guys said, that left hook is always there. He has a very nasty right hand too. And then you get into the parts that you have no idea what's going to happen. The clinch is very, very interesting. I was talking to Dan Albert the other day about this, and it's both guys are a lot more crafty inside the clinch than you would think. Pereira seems like a brute inside the clinch, but he's actually quite burst with a few different clinches. He has foot sweeps. He has nasty knees. And Ciryl Gane is different, but kind of the same. Ciryl Gane uses footwork a lot inside the clinch. He can operate from different grips. He can operate from overhook, from tricep tie, collar tie. So he has quite a few options there inside the clinch, and it's going to be very interesting to see how strong they are relative to each other. Ciryl Gane is very, very strong. That cannot be overstated. Obviously, he looked like an idiot against John Jones, but that was mostly because of that awful left hand that Ryan Wagner was describing. Or was it a right hand? But either way, it was a terrible rear hand that he crossed his feet, squared his hips. Not much to do with strength, but Ciryl has been very strong. Do you remember some tie-ups against Ngannou, which we can all agree is inhumanly strong? And Gane was handling him in a lot of exchanges, obviously with technique, but if you are not strong enough to compete, like, technique is not going to make up for it a lot of the time against someone as big and strong as Ngannou. Like, Ciryl is ripped at 256 or something. We'll see. Pereira obviously also very well known to being insanely strong, but that's at smaller weight classes. With both guys having foot sweeps and that kind of stuff, it makes for a very interesting clinch battle. I would say that Ciryl offers a little bit more danger with the elbows, but Pereira's knees might be more punishing actually. Ciryl has technical knees. He has like cool, like clever setups that he does, like circle with his feet. He pivots a little bit. He frames to open up space, and he attacks with knees that had decent power. But Pereira just had like destroyer knees that he can throw with very little space. So the clinch is very interesting. I hope we can get to see some extended clinch exchanges between these two, just of the curiosity that it brings to me. And then you have the wrestling. Pereira has been solid defending in static positions. He can just like grab a whizzer. In fact, he was relying on just like collar ties to defend takedowns, which is something that you never see. But he's so strong on the hips, and so he can just set up like a wide base against the fence and just deny double legs with just framing with collar ties, which is insane. But again, he's dealing with a way bigger guy here. Like, Ciryl is so much bigger than Magomed Ankalaev. And then you have like Gane, like recent development. Miguel mentioned the fight against Volkov, and we gotta remember that Ciryl broke his foot. I think like super bad, like very early on that fight, which is something that could happen here because Alex Pereira knows how to check like kicks too. So he fought most of that fight like very badly injured, which explains the awful performance in a way, because I feel some of it was like Ciryl just being Ciryl. But then Ciryl shows some like cool wrestling shots in that one. She chained a takedown that was very, very beautiful actually. Like, DC was very impressed. And Volkov is like, you see guys getting takedowns on Volkov, but not that kind of like quick level change into like turning the corner with the double leg. So that was interesting, right? But I think I gotta agree with Ryan that I think that Gane probably has the tools to make a win happen here, but you gotta go with a guy that has like a more consistent jab that makes a lot less mistakes on the feet. That's the big problem for Gane. I gotta agree with Ryan again here that Gane has a lot of tools to compete in all the ranges, and sometimes he gets to look super pretty and clever on the feet, but then he just does like some very stupid shit, and you don't want to be doing stupid stuff against Alex Pereira. The question of the power, I have zero doubts that Alex Pereira can knock everyone out in the planet. Like, I mean, honestly, like, I talk about this. I don't want to go in a super long ramble here, but like, I think Ilia Topuria can knock out everyone, but obviously he's not going to find the chances against a heavyweight because he's not going to find the distance. It's very dangerous for him to close the distance against a guy that is like 150 pounds bigger than him. But Pereira, with his light heavyweight size, he's big enough that there's no one in this world that he cannot knock out. That being said, Ciryl has a ridiculous chin. We've only seen him hurt basically against Tai Tuivasa. He got hit super hard and recovered very quickly. And one thing with Gane, and one thing that makes me feel like Gane has a very good chin is that, well, in one hand, he's very aware. He's always like, he has bad reactions at times, but he never panics. He's always has his eyes on his opponent. He's always trying to make something happen with his defense. He's not the guy that panics, close his eyes. He like panics and throws bad punches, but he's very in the moment. But counter argument to that is that Ciryl gets hit on terrible positions very often, especially like moving back with his chin up in the air. He basically never gets hurt. Like we're talking about a very, very durable guy. So Pereira is obviously capable of like knocking him out, but he might need a very clean shot to put Gane out on this one. But yeah, I mean, just like some like random thoughts to contribute to the conversation because most of you guys have said everything. I think that I gotta go with Poatan here just because of consistency. I think that Gane has this should be close to even, and I think Gane has actual like decent avenues to victory. I think he can annoy Pereira on the feet a lot, but the mistakes are very dangerous. Pereira is very consistent. He does very little mistakes, and I don't think the kind of mistakes that Alex Pereira does sometimes are going to give Gane good openings. So I think that Gane, to get an actual consistent win here, he would have to rely on clinching and wrestling, and I'm not quite sure if he has the tools to implement that consistently. Or not the tools, but the brain to actually do it. So that's it.
Yeah, so all of us in that fight recognizing the difficulty in predicting how some of the X factors will play out, like the size and the grappling, but all recognizing that Pereira is a more consistent fighter and therefore sort of leaning in that direction, although we're also all saying that Cyril Gane has a real shot, and if he plays a smart game here, then he could win. So that's a fight that will satisfy a lot of curiosity for sure, where a lot of these other ones will there's a good chance they go exactly how we think they will go. This one, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, and we can't say that very often for a heavyweight fight, so that's kind of a cool thing for this cross division fight to take place, just to give us some unknowns to really dig our teeth into. So that brings us to the main event, and we have, of course, the lightweight champion Ilia Topuria at -625 taking on the interim, two-time interim lightweight champ Justin Gaethje at +460 as an underdog. So obviously huge odds here for Ilia Topuria, who is on the greatest 3-fight winning streak we've ever seen in the sport, is one of the greatest talents we've ever seen, and is just a wonderful technical fighter that we all love and enjoy to watch, versus Justin Gaethje, who had a crazy fight with Paddy Pimblett. But I'm curious to see if we can outline a few ways that he might be able to trouble Ilia Topuria here, if we can kind of go against these massive odds. Although I think that we'll also all have plenty of praise to give for Topuria as well. So to start us off, Dan, I'm sure you're pretty happy to get to the point to talk about Ilia Topuria here, right?
Yeah, these are two guys that I'm pretty familiar with in general because I've written too much about them and will probably continue to. So I think to simplify, let's start with Topuria. I think the big issue people often underestimate about Topuria is that he's very much minimalistic in his effectiveness, but it's often in very specific cases where his seeming vulnerabilities are much more difficult to catch or get to than it meets the eye, partially because 1, he's very insistent, 2, he's incredibly consistent, and 3, he's nearly unrivaled as far as taking the initiative on the feet without overcommitting to it. And by that I mean that there's kind of an idea of initiative in MMA where the whole idea of it is you consistently grasp it, and those who do usually have the greatest success in the sport. But Topuria is the kind of fighter who is able to grasp the initiative because he's doing things that many other MMA fighters don't. Namely, he's very positionally aware. He's incredibly active as far as baiting and drawing out mistakes with positioning. He's incredibly tactically aware as far as what opponents are doing and quickly making micro adjustments that are flexible and not very easy to punish. There are weaknesses to Topuria I'll get to, but as far as somebody who's very consistent, Topuria's whole idea is I don't have to do a lot, but everything I'm going to do is going to be very simple. It's going to be very practical, and it's going to consistently be unpredictable. And for somebody who doesn't technically do a lot, that means you have to employ a very, very specific kind of game. I've already touched upon how he's easily one of the best pressure fighters I've ever seen in terms of footwork. And a big deal for making that happen is Topuria understands that a pressure fighter's goal is to make an opponent guess what they're going to do. And he's excellent at hiding when he's going to commit, when he actually will, drawing out opponent offense, and constantly being insistent with his counterpunching threats and actual counterpunching to make that happen, and constantly weaponizing space over and over and over again. And so actually winning space from Topuria requires like set mix-ups. It requires lots of like different tricks. It requires lots of consistency, and it requires fighting him tooth and nail on the initiative because it's something he's very quick to seize. And why that matters a lot is that Justin Gaethje himself is a very, very interesting case study of a guy who does deserve credit for, with his kind of career and with his kinds of wars, being still kind of decently ranked highly in a lightweight where you would think a fighter like him would suffer from some turnover. And some of that is kind of just due to the nature of like his competition, but also like certain prospects not being able to break through. Because I think we can all agree those Zahabi decisions were very close. But also Gaethje himself has constantly remained at least an elite presence that everyone he's fought would acknowledge that. Now, where Gaethje gets interesting is that he's a fighter who everyone understands has had those two different styles of different strengths that he hasn't really been able to meld the strengths of both into one another. And by that, I mean, we talked about how Topuria has a great sense of initiative. Gaethje is somebody who has always struggled with enforcing initiative correctly. And by that, I mean the pressure iteration of Gaethje, I've emphasized this 1,000 times now, he employed great pressure. He was good at controlling opponents, drawing them into counter punching, into counter kicking, and constantly making them have to commit to a firefight. The problem is that he had to rely upon himself being craftier, better defensively, and being able to outdamage them in that fire when his own gas tank could struggle there especially. And when he ran into guys who did have the composure or firepower and defensive skills to handle him, he couldn't really overcome those things. So the change in style then is kind of meant to compensate. So in many ways, he got better at certain things like pace control and being able to like improve some mechanical ideas, especially a shifting kind of offense, and especially behind his feints. But he's lost so much of his initiative because he's excessively overcompensating the other way around for it. That, as many people have pointed out too, he's not great at enforcing his jab, but he's not great at enforcing some of his counter kicks like he used to, because he's more so pressed to kind of wait for opponents. And there are flashes where like you can see him try to employ some pressure again that comes out in spots, but he's just not as good as he used to at it. There are signs of it, such as against Vic versus Chandler, and even against Patty, where he gets the right ideas, but he often kind of gets in his head about weird things. So in context of fighting Topuria, I do think like his chances here aren't great. And the biggest issue of all is the fact that Gaethje has always been very reliant upon his dipping into shelling up defenses on a hair trigger. And against a guy who feeds upon those kinds of reactions for level changes or to create mix-ups, that's the kind of stuff Topuria feeds upon front foot or neutrally. And those have only gotten worse in his last few, and with the Pimblet fight being especially damning with how much his defensive dips are getting punished by a guy who, well, he ended up better than we expected, isn't exactly somebody I think would give Gaethje's defenses that much trouble years ago. Now, in regards to ways he can make this fight still work, though, I do think him backing up isn't a great idea in general. I think he should be standing his ground, attempting to narrow in on kicks quite a bit. The danger is that I don't think he should try to play a game of like baits versus counters with Topuria at all. That because I think that's a battle that he's just not going to win. But I do think countering or throwing with Topuria is a good idea. Where I think he should especially narrow down stuff is with tie-ups in his clinch game. Because Topuria has like excellent like ability to draw things out, especially kicks. It's far harder to kick him than most people expect. The one thing that you can get to Topuria with is that you can intercept him. And there are tricks Gaethje has shown behind the level change jab where he can draw guys into his collar ties and the like. Now, against a guy who's going to be shorter than him, that might be a bit difficult, as Alvarez kind of showed you can fight back in the clinch and get him to back off. But it does give him some looks to do if he's willing to be insistent or willing to play the intercepting. The problem is that I think we're kind of past the point where Gaethje has like the actual abilities to make this very competitive physically. Whereas a few years ago, I think like he could make this go a lot longer, but against someone who's very consistent and very prone to picking up on little mistakes and then punishing them incessantly, naturally, it's not an impossible thing to pull off, but we're probably past the point where he could. So I expect Topuria to finish him within 2 rounds.
Awesome. Yeah, that was quite thorough. And so I don't have like a ton to add there, although I say that and I'm probably just going to ramble here for a bunch because I, like talking about both of these guys quite a bit. But I think there's some things I can sort of ride your coattails, Dan, for a little bit there because I definitely agree in the general consensus that it's going to be hard to fathom a Justin Gaethje pick because he's so much more inconsistent. He's so much more physically declined at this part of his career. He's also just we know he's kind of an idiot, and like his corner and his work with Trevor Whitman, they always like they do a decent job of coming up with good ideas and game plans. Sometimes that is seemingly counter to what they've trained him to do. So what I mean by that is you talked about the change in his style, predominantly from being a mad, crazy pressure fighter into being a bit more of an out fighter, or at least a boxer puncher type if we're going to use the boxing archetypes. But still, and then it'll just be some fights where they really want him to pressure, and that was the case against Paddy Pimblett, where his corner is constantly imploring him to pressure, and he starts off doing that very well, and then he just kind of just settles into the 3rd round into letting Paddy Pimblett jab the shit out of him for a while. He kind of gets dissuaded. He kind of falls into wanting to find a big counter shot because Pimblett is so easy to hit, and he's trying to hit him with left hooks, but he just keeps eating jabs. It's a bit of a mess there, and then he kind of brings himself back in a little bit, but then even still, his corner is constantly telling him to, take power off his shots and to not overthrow. And then he's constantly falling around like he's on ice, way overthrowing and chasing people around. And that's where he gets into trouble. And so it's like at a higher level, you just don't see Topuria these days falling into the same issues. Like he had some of the problems with overthrowing earlier in his career. Like you can watch his fight with Bryce Mitchell and see him whiff huge shots and fall to his knees basically. And he mostly shored up that kind of stuff. He's such a methodical, measured fighter. He fights for every inch, both in the space, in terms of the octagon space, but also in terms of the tactical battles that you were talking about, Dan. And it's just like, he's so much more consistent and he's so much more trustworthy because of that. We know that he is going to use his jab. We don't know that with Justin Gaethje because he always loses it or forgets it or finds it in the 3rd round like he did against Fiziev in their first fight or whatever he does. It's just like it's very hard to, even if you can imagine Gaethje being competent enough and hard hitting enough in the pocket to landing something, or if I could sketch out any sort of a fight that would make sense, it would probably be if he could somehow recreate what he did to Poirier in their rematch. Although that's much tougher to do because, the big difference between those two fights between Gaethje versus Poirier 1 and 2 is the change in Gaethje and how he approaches things. And he's much more of a back foot fighter in that fight. But the thing about that is Poirier is not the level of pressure fighter that Ilia Topuria is. Dan called him, probably one of the best pressure fighters we've ever seen, and I agree with that. And so, in that second fight with Poirier, Poirier is coming forward, and Gaethje just has to eat a bunch of huge shots, and it's not exactly clear how that fight is going to go. And he ends up finding a huge kick to end it, shifting in. And finding, that specific weakness in Poirier's defense, and, setting it up with some crafty but dangerous shifting entries to make that happen. So it's like you can imagine, I saw Ilia Topuria get dropped with a totally different kind of kick by Jai Herbert. And so I can imagine if Gaethje, like you mentioned, is really intent on kicking from range, then he might be able to make something happen there if he's strafing around. But just generally strategically yielding that forward or the front foot to Ilia Topuria just seems like a terrible idea. Even if there's some world where he could sort of repeat what he did to Poirier, just at a big picture level, you're giving Topuria exactly what he wants, and he has navigated that against much better outfighters like Volkanovski and even Holloway. I would consider a better outfighter at this point than Justin Gaethje, at least in terms of raw technique and mechanics, although, less dangerous of a one-shot threat. And so there's just a lot there that you can say. It's really hard for me to imagine what Gaethje really does. The other route is to try and pressure like he did against Pimblett in spurts. But like I said, it's at this point in his career, it's kind of something that he doesn't do very consistently. And then when he does, he throws himself all over the place. You mentioned the collar ties and the clinching. That is something that, Gaethje's probably one of his best weapons is, punching into collar ties and finding uppercuts like he did against Fiziev. But that's also kind of how Volkanovski got knocked out, like reaching for a collar tie against Topuria. It's a dangerous thing to do against somebody who's a tighter, more mechanical, and better in the pocket positionally. And, that's Gaethje just falls apart in the pocket a lot of times. He's dangerous there, but think of the last 10-second exchange with Holloway where he's just kind of falling all over himself, and Holloway is maintaining his stance and ends up blasting him when he's out of stance and knocks him out. And that's exactly the type of thing that I can see happening if he engages Topuria in the pocket at all. And so I struggle to find a way that Gaethje can do anything consistently to win here. And even if I could outline the perfect game plan, I just don't trust him to be smart enough to follow that game plan, where I definitely trust Topuria to just take the same steady pressure approach that we've seen before, using his feints, using his jab, methodically working in. He's got good low kicks of his own. He's such a good cage cutter, and he knows when to drop back and counter. He knows when to hold his ground. And if anything that he really lacks, it's we mentioned he can get bopped sometimes when he's just throwing in the pocket, like Charles Oliveira nailing him with a huge elbow, or I mentioned Jai Herbert, or even that finish in Jai Herbert, he's just like eating a counter while he just slumps Jai Herbert. He can be hit there. It's just that he's operating at such a large differential in power and positioning and technique that it often doesn't really matter. That could get him into a little bit of trouble against somebody like Gaethje. Like I could see him hurting him with a big uppercut or something like that. I mean, we're still talking fundamentally. We've only seen Topuria at light against a top quality lightweight once, discounting Jai Herbert, who's not in the upper echelon. And so there's still a few unknowns there. But then you can just throw in this whole other thing, which is Topuria could also just grapple him. Gaethje is not exactly super easy to grapple and stuff, but Topuria just has that as well. Like, and we saw him kind of shockingly easily take Holloway down, although he didn't do too much with it. But then we also saw him turn his hips down on Charles Oliveira's body lock takedown, get on top, get to a crucifix, get work done there against one of the best grapplers in the sport. So Topuria is also just an incredible grappler and has all of that as well. So I said I would be short. I was not short, but it's hard not to say a lot about these two guys. And I guess at this point, I just want to hear what Ryan has to say. I know you've got something to add here, but I'm wondering if you just agree with the general consensus that it's hard to find a way for Gaethje to win here.
Yeah, I feel a similar way to you guys, that there's ways Gaethje can compete. There's things he can do to make it hard for Topuria, and things that he naturally does that can be dangerous for Topuria to navigate. But I don't see a great reason to pick Gaethje or to expect him to win myself. I think one of the interesting things about this fight is that a lot of Topuria's fights against his best competition have involved him having to close distance. Both Volkanovski and Holloway were longer range slicksters that had longer weapons than Topuria, and he had to find a way to get through that gap without losing position to put hands on them. And it turns out he's incredible at that, one of the best we've ever seen. And Gaethje is going to be doing a lot more standing in place punching with him. On one hand, that to some degree makes it more comfortable for Topuria, where he'll spend more time in the range he likes to work. But on the other hand, it also offers threats that Topuria didn't have against the best guys he's fought. His elite wins have been all-time wins over Holloway and Volkanovski, and a very quick fight with Oliveira where they both landed some shots. Topuria was able to control it with his jab, and then he quickly shut Oliveira's lights out with a counter. So a lot of those minutes he spent in there with those guys were fighting somebody who was much less of a threat than him, where his main concern was getting through the gap and finding a way to close distance without losing position. And Gaethje is going to be a lot more threatening than those guys were. He didn't really have to worry about simultaneous counters against Holloway or Volkanovski, because not only do they not have the power threat that he does, but they're also not very good at it. They weren't standing in there, standing their ground and sitting down on a hard jab when Topuria comes in. And Gaethje can do a lot of that stuff, which could make it more difficult and dangerous for Topuria. Gaethje being able to jab with him, to plant his feet and refuse to back off can be difficult enough, but Gaethje also has some tools to work around his defense. Topuria really likes getting his shoulder in front of the right hand, and Gaethje can pair his overhands with his uppercuts to kind of manipulate Topuria's hand positioning there. He also has a nice left hook that he can throw in combination to exploit that response from Topuria. If he's able to get Topuria thinking defensively in the pocket and not where he doesn't have to be worried about an immediate counter, then that shoulder roll, Gaethje could chuck out an uppercut or an overhand and then hop into a left hook to catch Topuria as he's kind of fading away behind the shoulder. Of course, I think Topuria is better in the pocket than Gaethje. He is better positionally. He loses his feet less. His punches are more efficient. He's better defensively, and I think he's more perceptive with counter punches. Another big thing going for Topuria is that sometimes when you have big punchers like this, it often goes like a snowball rolling downhill, where one guy moves forward, he's beating the other guy up, the other comes back and he's beating the other guy up. That won't happen with Topuria. Gaethje has some counters off the back foot, but they tend to be very sloppy. He swings wide a lot and loses his balance. He's a lot more dangerous when he's planted and Topuria is coming in than if Topuria succeeds in pushing him back. If Gaethje's going backwards and Topuria has some momentum on the front foot, then Gaethje's going to be losing his feet. His attacks are going to be a lot more predictable, and Topuria, I think, is going to have much more of an easy time dealing with that than Gaethje will when he's coming forward. Topuria is a lot better at sliding back just enough to make a punch miss and throwing a tight counter without losing his feet. We don't know how he operates in extended lengths off the back foot. If someone can keep him going backwards and force him to circle around the octagon. But I don't expect that to happen here. He's sharp enough moving backwards a step or two and pitching out hop step counters, staying defensively tight, exploiting whatever openings Gaethje leaves. And Gaethje has not been sufficiently insistent with his pressure in recent years that I don't think he's going to be able to just bite down on his mouthpiece and accept taking a lot of damage in order to move forward. I think when he does get on the front foot, Topuria is going to take space back with counters, and Gaethje is either going to get hit hard and back off, or he's going to respect it and try moving around at range a little bit more. And I think that's kind of the approach that Gaethje and Whitman will take here. I don't think they're going to pressure heavy. And I think that makes it a little bit less dangerous for Topuria, but it also makes it easier. I think pressuring would make it a lot more dangerous for Gaethje. He's in much more danger of getting his light shut off with a counter. But it also makes it easier for Topuria to navigate because there's less threat coming back at him. And as I think we all that have spoken so far agree, Topuria is a little bit more nuanced, a little bit craftier, a little bit more slick in the exchanges that they're likely to have. So yeah, I think that's going to be a big thing that dictates the fight, that Topuria is comfortable moving forward or fighting in spurts backwards, whereas Gaethje is going to fall apart if he's moving back a lot. And I think that in the 50-50 exchanges, where they're both in the center of the octagon, Topuria is a little bit more crafty about how he enters, a little bit more crafty about how he moves during the exchanges, both within his stance, keeping his weight distributed enough that he can defend the next punch, and relative to Gaethje, he'll be able to pivot around him, take some angles to land shots that we won't see as much from Gaethje. I think some of the areas Gaethje can have some success is he has a little bit more versatile of a lead hand in some ways. Topuria has a great jab. He has a great left hook, but he doesn't do a whole lot of kind of like traditional boxing combinations with the left hand, whereas Gaethje can pair his left hand, he can pair his jab and his lead hook, and he might be able to have some success jabbing with Topuria and then getting the lead hook going. And then if Topuria is jabbing in and out and thinking about setting up the kind of level change right hands off his jab that he likes, Gaethje being able to extend the exchange a little bit with his lead hand, double up on it, could give Topuria some pause, make him hesitate on the next punch, and give Gaethje an opening to land a big right hand. Another possibility is his leg kicks. I think Topuria is quite good at setting up and defending leg kicks at range, and I don't think Gaethje will have a ton of success just punting leg kicks on the outside. But if he's able to get in some messy exchanges and then fire off leg kicks as Topuria is exiting, especially with that shoulder roll he likes to do. If you watch the Josh Emmett fight and see how Topuria is just sliding out of range and just getting his shoulder in the way of Josh Emmett's overhands, and imagine if Emmett took some sting off the overhands and started sticking leg kicks behind them. There could have been a lot. He could have had a lot more success with that. The way Topuria has to rotate inwards to do that shoulder roll leaves him open to leg kicks. But again, I don't think Gaethje is going to be able to consistently get those kind of combinations without getting hurt. I think he's not even going to try that a lot. I don't expect him to try leg kicking in combination or out of exchanges much. And aside from just thinking that Topuria has a general edge everywhere, I think that he's going to, like we've said, I think Gaethje is much more variable in how he approaches the fight. He doesn't always fight to his strengths. I think he's very, very perceptive and very good tactically about figuring out what kind of tools he can use to hurt the other guy. But I don't think strategically the same intelligence is there. I don't think he can stick to a a committed game plan that maximizes his chances the way Topuria can. And I also think Gaethje is not at his best right now. In the fight with Paddy Pimblett, he looked quite bad, I think, worse than we've ever seen him before. And I don't think there were some things Paddy was doing that gave him trouble. He was doing a good job intercepting his level changes, but I don't think that the step down we saw Gaethje take was because of Paddy Pimblett. I think that Gaethje is not at his best right now, and Topuria he hasn't shown any signs of doing anything but getting better every fight. So yeah, I echo you guys in that Gaethje can be dangerous. He hits hard. He hits well in the ranges Topuria is good in, and he can hurt Topuria, but the pick is Topuria. All right. With that said, Benio, do you see this kind of similar to we do, or do you have anything different?
I think I gotta agree pretty much with what all of you have said already. That's bound to happen when the fight is like the biggest fight. Everyone is going to like do a lot of tape study and have similar takes, I guess, for a fight like this. A lot of people are talking about leg kicks here. I feel like the setups for the leg kicks for Justin Gaethje have deteriorated quite a bit since he has been more of a like dedicated boxer in his later half of his career, which happened at the same time that he turned into this more like laid back, like boxer puncher, counter puncher, as opposed to the pressurer he was early in his career. It's still probably something that he will want to try here in this fight for sure. Topuria is not a void when it comes to leg kicks. He has turned into quite a leg kicker himself, actually. We saw that in the Volkanovski one fight. He landed quite a few nasty ones on Max Holloway. He didn't quite do that much against Oliveira, who fights at a stance that is very well designed to deal with leg kicks, though. But still, I think just in an open space or neutral, he should try to kick quite a lot. Topuria knows how to deal with leg kicks. He has good reactions. He blocks pretty much all the kicks, but it still sucks to get kicked in the forearms by a bigger guy. And Justin Gaethje is going to be bigger than Topuria here. So that's something that we have to consider, and maybe he can set up his head kicks with that. Even though I think Justin Gaethje was at one moment a craftier kicker, it seems like his hip flexibility is still there. He's still a dangerous, like powerful kicker. One thing that plays against Justin Gaethje big time in this fight is that ever since he turned into this like counter puncher, if you go back to the Cowboys running fight, like perfect example, what Gaethje wants to do is like use his lead hand to lure you in, touch you with the jabs sometimes, or just like pull at you, draw big reactions, fill the space with leg kicks, and then he wants you to like close the distance, grab a slight angle, counter punch you, put you out. And in one hand, like you have Topuria, who has to traverse the distance here. He's the shorter fighter, as he's always going to be at lightweight. But on the other hand, Topuria is never like closing range recklessly here. He's always probing behind the jab. He's always taking small steps. When he closes distance more aggressively, maybe shifting or maybe like with hop steps. He's always putting combinations together, moving his head, adjusting his angle like mid combination. He's very hard to get a counter on that way. I think Ryan made a great point when it comes to Gaethje's like best puncher chance comes in his ability to be a simultaneous counterer. So if he can like just through a big right hand over the top or left hook with Topuria and get the best of it, which is hard, obviously. Topuria, very tight left hook with insane rotation, but there's always a luck factor in those kind of exchanges. So he can roll the dice maybe and get a win like that. And then obviously you have the clinch. collartize into uppercuts seemed like a good idea. The distance that his uppercuts have to travel is pretty short because Topuria himself is short. But he gotta look out for Topuria doing two things that he does very well inside clinches. He showed this against Max Holloway mostly. Against Charles Oliveira, he was mostly concerned about defending the wrestling and just like getting him off him. But against Max Holloway, we saw Topuria two classics counter collartize tactics, and one is obviously like just landing nasty body shots downstairs, and the other one is like blading his stance to like make the upper arm slip and just being able to punch over the top. He landed a big punch on Max Holloway like that. He was like blading himself inside the clinch, which can be dangerous for a variety of reasons. But then he was like coming over the top with a lead hook, disarming the collar tie of Holloway, which is something that can be dangerous for Gaethje here. Gaethje's best shot in this fight comes mostly from probably like enforcing neutral, like just like not giving up that much ground, just accept that exchanges are going to happen and you might die at any moment. Then just try to make it dirty with the collar ties. When you're at range, punish with kicks all the time. And as Ryan said, if you can get like Topuria like defaulting to stepping back behind the shoulder roll, that's an excellent moment to just land nasty leg kicks, and he might be able to make something happen there, but you gotta go with Topuria. Topuria has the more nuanced jab. He's more dangerous inside. He's more compact. His punches are tighter, and his positioning is better. Like there's and if you couple that with like the body attack, just engaging, not a big fan of being attacked to the body. We haven't seen much body punching from Topuria in the last few, but it's probably still there, right? So yeah, I mean, just Topuria just being the vastly more consistent fighter. Gaethje looked very sloppy too against Pimblet, and that's terrible sign. If Gaethje is going to have a chance in this fight, he needs to show up with good conscience over his mechanics mostly. The mechanics are very important because Topuria is going to be punching inside of your punches if you get loopy, and that's a recipe for disaster. So yeah, I'm also going Topuria knockout on round 2. Please, then Tom, give us the closing thoughts for this one.
Yeah, sure. A lot of stuff's been said, but one real glaring tactic you guys aren't mentioning for making Justin Gaethje's case, touching on the leg kicks, the jabs, the simultaneous counters, all great, by the way. But you guys forgot about the eye pokes, man. The eye pokes. This is legit his best tactic to win here. Watch. He's got to come out. He's got to poke him in the eye, break the momentum, which will kill my under bet on this fight under 1.5 rounds, right? And go from there. Obviously, Gaethje has been on the wrong side of those as well, plenty of times. But it is funny he has looked to be embracing that as of late, the Dandasso there. But yeah, I think that there's some great points about the leg kicks, but also the lack thereof of leg kicks and perhaps reasons why, right? Like Feño just said, or I'm really glad we had Dan Albert on this breakdown. Just really excellent work he's done on both these guys as well. And I don't know if it was Miguel or Ryan also, which I agree with, talking about Gaethje's jab. But speaking of my 1.5 rounds bet that I think's gonna hit, I think everybody's well seeing it go under 2 rounds here. The problem with the Gaethje jab is that he doesn't throw it until it's over 1.5 rounds. I know my guy Dan Albert will co-sign with there for me. A lot of you guys recall, it almost seems like sometimes it's like round 3. It doesn't start showing up like in that Fiziev fight, right? Their first one, I should say. Kind of weird scoring on both, if I recall correctly. But it is funny because, and so one of you guys were pointing it out as well earlier with like Poaton's jab. That's one of the reasons why I picked him against southpaws, because he will jab, and Poaton, of course, has a great jab, but it's just he's so inconsistent with it. Like both him and Gaethje, I don't know what you guys think, and you appreciate the boxing reference here, but like maybe you could be like there could be more aesthetically pleasing jabs in their divisions, but in the history of their divisions, they have literally, they have they have literally the Larry Holmes jab of their division, right? Like as far as like a telephone pole jab, like Poetons and Gaethjes are just thudding and really just good, powerful jabs, man. And they're like, why don't you throw it more? It's so maddening. So that'll be real curious to see here and how that goes for him if he tries to do it earlier, even if he has the chance. But yeah, I will just touch on the grappling a little more. I will say that I think because of those dangers, I think the grappling could be even more lively. Like you guys pointed out, he wasn't shy to organically, granted, didn't look like it was like plan A, despite him being, a pressuring guy, and pressuring is going to lead to those scenarios. Like, no, he just went with it and wasn't afraid to go to the ground with Bronx Oliveira. And we've seen Gaethje just get tooled and toyed with there. I don't play too much into the, narrative nation as far as like, oh, Topuria is taking this seriously now after Gaethje made that comment about the divorce, and yeah, he's going to teach him a lesson. So he's probably going to want to, finish him harder or whatever. It sounds really homoerotic there, but you know what I mean? Like, and you'd be like, oh, like how embarrassing would it be? And this is true, right? Like, even though we're all predicting the knockout, I think I'm going to predict a submission here to be different. I know, big difference. I'm picking Topuria. But I also think, I could argue, I should say that would be more humiliating to Gaethje and like the event if you're just making, the American just say uncle in front of a guy like Trump, like how humiliating of a humiliation ritual are we going to be in for? So that's what I'm going to be rooting
If one
here
man
for,
can
guys.
submit you, think about what two men could do to you.
Yeah, I mean, just the possibilities. The really big guys, big guys doing big nasty things. Trump loves that, and so does RFK too. I wouldn't think I would be powerful trifecta. But yeah, I'm gonna save you guys from we're getting a little late here. I'm going into impressions, but I don't want to retread the same ground. I do think Topuria is gonna sub him though, which hopefully you guys don't think that is too crazy of an option either. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that is crazy at all. Like I said, that's just like we spent so much more time on the striking because it just seems like obviously there's more there for Gaethje to be competitive with, but and he isn't always the easiest to take down, but still it just seems like an area where he, if a lot of that did play out, he probably would get outclassed. But yeah, I like the pick there of a submission. I could see as well a club and sub or something like that. Although it seems like when Topuria hits people, they usually go actually just completely lights out. But Gaethje is quite he gets hurt and recovers all the time. We remember his debut against Michael Johnson and stuff. It's like, or how often he was getting hurt back when he was a pressure fighter. But yeah, so I'm with all you guys on all this stuff. I think that that was a very thorough job we did on this 7-fight card, and I hope that the listeners appreciate getting some different perspectives here. There wasn't so much disagreement. We did agree a lot, but there was some back and forth there, and some people being stronger in their picks than others. Some of us waffling. I know I did, but in general, I think that we treated all these fights with some real seriousness, despite the kind of hilarious circumstances of the event in general, which we don't have time to talk about. So at this point, let's just wrap it up. And I think I'll just sort of give your guys's your Twitter handles and your different things here real quick after we're done. But if anybody else has any last parting thoughts you want to give on the state of this White House event, any of the drama going on, the people trying to sue, maybe it's going to rain, anything like that, are you guys following any of that stuff, or are you just got your head down and focusing on the tape study?
I
I'm
heard someone on
hoping
Twitter say that
there's a
Luke
lot of
Thomas
bugs here.
was trying to sue and shut it down.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true. I didn't look into that too much.
What'd you say,
that's not
Danielle?
that's not a big deal, but I think they're gonna get past that. Sorry.
Yeah, I agree.
I just hope there's a lot of bugs and probably rain. It would be hilarious to see like Justin Gage sleeping all over the cage if it was wet. That would be amazing.
Is it
man.
outside?
Yeah,
Yes.
It is
Yeah.
outside, yeah.
Oh wow.
we did not factor that into our analysis at all, but it will be hot and sweaty and potentially rainy as well. But
Who's going to look the most stupid if it rains?
So
I know
I
it's
got a,
just
If it's
I got a
wet
bold
for
prediction.
Topuria versus Gaethje, imagine Gaethje just like falling all over the place.
See, you guys
You
are going
already
towards.
slips on banana peels all the time already.
See, you guys are going toward Gaethje, and I get it, but like, here's my bold prediction. What I was gonna say, I'm glad you guys brought it here already organically, which is if you were to miss the event and you wake up and there's a random headline, like what's the wildest headline you could read the next day? And there's a lot of stuff. There's rain. There's a possible thunderstorm. This is an outdoor
I mean, it's an active
electrical
shooter.
arc. Right, yeah, like there's so much stuff. Like, well, that's the sadly depressingly real one. But the comical one is if anybody died, this is who I would think, because this is the only way where it's funny. Sorry, Michael Chandler, but how funny would it be if Michael Chandler, the guy, it was like his dream to be on this card, and like if there's an Owen Hart situation, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if that reference is gonna go up anyone's head. Like, it's got to be Michael Chandler, right? Because if it's anybody else, it's sad. If it's anybody else that is not Chandler, then it's sad, right, guys?
God.
You're the one who said that, man.
Super
not me.
dark.
Oh no.
I love it. All right,
Imagine the deleted tweet from Connor next day.
Yeah. Oh man, that's so true.
Oh.
That is a fitting way to end this, though, because I think that perhaps like I don't know, like Chandler, maybe we can do a better job of sailing off into the sunset rather than just dying on live television in front of the president on the White House lawn. But I think we can put to bed this great, awesome roundtable. I think if there is another good caliber event in the future, maybe for a fight week event, or if they stack some future card, we can put this together again. It's been on my mind to do something like this, but there just wasn't really many events that really deserved a full sort of gathering of the brains, or assembling the Avengers, if you will.
Maybe in like
But
8 months will be a good card.
yeah, maybe there might be another one this year that is worthy of that. But yeah, anybody who's wherever you're listening to this or whatever, let us know what you think. Hit us up in our DMs. I'll give the Twitter handles here, but let us know in the comments. First, thanks to Dan Albert. You can find him at typewritingda on Twitter. danalbert.substack.com for his wonderfully detailed and lengthy articles, which we all very much enjoy. And then you heard Ryan Wagner give some really great thoughts here, picking some fighters more strongly than the rest of us had the balls to do. And you can find his freestyle wrestling, Sanda, all kinds of wonderfully deep MMA articles on mixingmartialarts.com. And he's Ryan A. Wag MMA on Twitter. And then Fenyo, editor of thefightsite.com, where you can find some of his stuff, but you can also find him on Twitter at FenyoXSky, and you should check him out on YouTube, where he does live streams. I'm sure you'll probably be doing a companion for this event, right, Fenyo, at the Fight Site Presents on YouTube?
Yes, sir.
All right, yeah. So if you guys want to listen Fenyo's live reaction and hear his analysis alongside the fights, that's always really great, because we know that
It's 50% analysis and 50% me complaining about hating Joe Rogan the whole time.
yeah, exactly. The commentary is often lacking anyway, so then you can just complain and give your own. And then I think the easiest one is Dan Tom, because you're Dan Tom MMA everywhere. So you're Dan Tom MMA at Substack and on YouTube and on X, and writing for MMA Junkie, USA Sports Today, like I mentioned, doing some stuff for Homo Fight. So did I miss anything there, Dan, or is that right? You say you've managed to keep your handle clean everywhere.
Yeah, no, that actually is correct. I'll just add one parting shot that you can reply to me at Dan Tom MMA in case this isn't posted, like where there's like a mass comment section. But if there's a comment section, please, for my own morbid curiosity, comment below what your ideal Michael Chandler death scenario is for this card. Is it a pyrotechnics malfunction? Is it him taking a bullet for an active for Trump via active shooter? Comment below. I would love to read them.
Oh, are we commissioning now? Please send me your closest to Josh Hokit, Bandit Keith, Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged series impressions.
Oh my gosh. All right, guys. I really appreciate you all coming on and staying up late well, at least for me on the East Coast here, to do this. And so we will do it again some other time. Thanks for your time, and we'll talk soon.